IB Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Monday. I know we got a lot of storms rolling through, and so wherever you're living at, I hope everything's all good. Hope the power is still on. Unfortunately, our guy Brian, the power got knocked out at his place. He put a note out about it on the message boards, which is why I am filling in today with Mr. Sean Davis on today's edition of the RTCF show. But not to worry, we're still going to have a lot of really awesome content coming out for you guys. Sean, I feel like we went from doing not a lot of shows together to, with Brian's vacation and then today with the power outage. We're getting a lot of Shaun and Trev shows in here, man. It's some pretty good stuff. How you doing today?
I'm good. We're like the Notre Dame wide receivers, right? The youngsters with Malachi Fields out and Gordon Faison over there playing a little lacrosse. They're getting a little opportunities during the spring. So we're getting our reps in, Trev. That's all.
We are, man. We are. We're getting the reps in. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have an awesome show coming your way. You guys know what it is. It's RTCF. And if this is your first time ever tuning in, we're going to cover recruiting first. And then we're going to cover the team. And then we're going to cover a topic that surrounds college football. So today we're going to talk about, for recruiting, Sean, we're going to break down some of the visitors that Notre Dame had on campus this past week. And I know you've got a lot of really good intel to deliver on some of those pieces and who all has been on campus for Notre Dame recently. And then we're going to dive into the team. And we are going to talk about some of the perceived strengths and weaknesses for this team heading into 2025. I put an article out there. It's also up on the message boards. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com at the premium message boards. But ESPN released an article talking about what some of the perceived strengths and weaknesses are for their way too early top 25 teams. Notre Dame has been consistently in that 4 to 6 range in a lot of these rankings. And so per ESPN, so their series of their way too early, one of their latest editions was the strengths and weaknesses for all of those teams. So we're going to break down what some of those are, why they are perceived as weaknesses. We're going to break down some of the other strengths as well for this team. Some of them a little bit more obvious than others. But Sean and I are going to spend some time talking about that. And then to wrap everything up today, we're going to talk about grand scheme of college football. We're going to be talking about what some of the surprise teams could be in college football this past season. And if anybody's been keeping up, March Madness, I'm sure a lot of people saw this coming with the way that the bracket is set up, but all 4 of the Final Four teams are all number 1 seeds, which is something that you haven't really seen a whole lot of in the men's tournament over the past couple seasons. There hasn't been that sleeper team, that Cinderella story. I mean, the lowest seeded team in the Elite Eight was a 3 seed, with it being Texas Tech. And so we're going to talk about looking at it through a college football lens. Is that going to be possible in this day and age of the college football playoffs, where you're going to have a 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed all potentially making it to the college football semifinals to give themselves a chance to fight for a national championship? So, Sean, today we have a loaded slate that we're going to bring to everybody. There's going to be a lot of fun topics to talk about. I'm ready to jump into everything today, man. You ready to go?
Let's get it.
All right, man. Well, we're going to kick today off with recruiting. And, Sean, I know that you have a lot of intel around Notre Dame's visitors that have been on campus this week. And one of the first players that I wanted to talk about today, and I'll kick it over to you, is Caden Finley. And Notre Dame wide receiver recruiting has been a hot topic of conversation really for the last couple seasons, but more so over the last couple weeks. And that is one of the areas that Notre Dame does have to elevate their game. And bringing a guy like Caden Finley around is certainly a step in the right direction. Sean, what do you say?
Caden Finley is a big-time wide receiver and almost a must-get in the 2026 class. You don't like saying that because Notre Dame is big picture really recruiting now in 26 and 27 from areas of strength, which is really good. They're transitioning as a program in that aspect. But at the wide receiver position, they're still a little bit behind in comparison to other positions. And Mike Brown now in his second recruiting cycle is doing a pretty good job of stepping things up. He was able, I think the bright spot in 25 was he was able to get big-time receivers in for official visits. That was the win. He didn't close. He didn't get any one of those guys to commit. However, he got them on campus for official visits. And now getting Caden Finley, getting the Mason James, and getting some of these other guys in for unofficial visits, which, Trevor, unofficial, that means the player family, they're paying their own dime to come and see what you have. that makes a huge statement. This is a kid they've been on for a long time. He's an absolutely very versatile receiver, 6'2". I don't know, I never feel comfortable with the weight of these kids because they're always adding as they get older. So his 6'2" is legit. Talked to his coach a couple of months ago. He said he feels like he's still growing into his body. And if you look at his film, great with the ball after the catch. I love the way he runs routes at this time in his high school career. Very similar to the way I loved Elijah Burris's route running. The first time I saw his film when he was a sophomore, I was like, yo, of course, makes sense, right? Who was his dad? Makes sense that he would know how to play the position and run routes. So Kadon Finley fits that mold. You can play him in any position. That's what I love about this kid. He's almost like getting two receivers in one because you're going to be able to put him at multiple spots in the formation to take advantage of his skill, gifts, and the talents. Great visit by all accounts. Notre Dame did a really good job. We just talked about it. Some publications are just now releasing information and giving predictions, crystal balling him to Notre Dame after the visit. He's going to be back for an official in June, and that's going to be very big to see if Notre Dame can close the deal. So I love him. I love what he adds. He would be probably the most significant pickup for Notre Dame and for Mike Brown. In that wide receiver room, I would probably say since the Jaden Greathouse class. So that's the last couple of years. So big moves made by Notre Dame when it comes to Kadon Finley, but they've always been at the top of his school. They've done a really good job with Kadon Finley from day one.
Kadon Finley has the opportunity to join some of the lineage that we're starting to see at Notre Dame, where sons of former NFL players, really, really good NFL players, are starting to fall in line and take their talents over to Notre Dame. We saw that with Bryce Young, and we saw that with Jordan Clark coming over via the transfer portal. Obviously, we know what Ryan Clark did in his professional career. We saw that with Elijah Burris. We saw that with Jerome Bettis Jr., and so Kadon Finley now has that opportunity, but I agree with you. All of his skill set jumps out to you on film. He has a really big catch radius. I really like how he runs routes. The thing that I like about players who have kind of that NFL lineage is they're a little bit farther ahead than where you would see a normal, call it senior, or soon to be senior, getting ready to play his final year in high school. And so that to me really jumped out on film to him. He's a really good route runner. He has really soft hands. He's able to play multiple positions on the field, and I think he fits in really well with what Notre Dame wants to do on offense. And I think that is a lot of where Notre Dame is starting to excel on the recruiting trail with wide receivers like a Kadon Finley. Guys like Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown and Gino Guidugli are able to sit down and say, hey, look, this is where we see you fitting in this offense. When I watch him on film, he does have a similar skill set to a Jaden Greathouse. In that 6'1" to 6'2" height range, he has similar skill sets. He's able to do things after the catch, but isn't known as a burner. I don't think anybody would look at Kadon Finley and say, hey, look, in a 100-meter or 100-yard race, he's up there with guys like Jeremiah Love and Leonard Moore. I don't know if he has that kind of speed, but he's able to do stuff after the catch the same way that I look at a guy like Jaden Greathouse. So this would be a really, really big get for Mike Brown and the rest of the wide receiver recruiting staff. Now, another player that jumped out to me, which I'm really happy when we're talking about unofficial visits, we talk about players coming in on their own dime. And there's a kid that came in also sticking with wide receivers here. Mason James was also on campus, and we've talked about him quite a bit on this show. And he's a kid that lives in Norman, Oklahoma. For anybody that doesn't know, that's Sooner country, and that is right down there in the heart of it. He grew up in Norman. He goes to high school there. Mason James, he's a 5'11", 6-foot kid. This would be another really big get for Notre Dame's wide receiver recruiting class. But, Shaun, it's massive that he came up on his own dime to come and take a visit up in South Bend when he's right in the Sooners' backyard. So talk to us a little bit about Mason James' visit and how all of that went with them.
From what we're hearing, Mason James' visit, I wouldn't categorize it as a home run. But in speaking to him on yesterday, it was a really good visit. He enjoyed the conversations that he had with Mike Brown, getting to know Mike Brown. It's about building a relationship, right? This getting him on campus, It's going to lead to getting him on campus for an official visit, hopefully. And then Notre Dame can make that home run visit or have that home run visit during the official visit when you have other commits or more commits around it, really impacting his thought process. That is a big move to leave Norman, Oklahoma, when you grew up surrounded by Oklahoma football. Oklahoma was one of the first teams that gave you a scholarship, gave you an offer. And so to leave that comfort zone and to want to come to South Bend is going to take a lot of work. And it's going to take a really strong relationship with Mike Brown, Marcus Freeman, and the rest of the offensive staff. And then more than that, it's going to take going into, if they get a kid like this, I think this is one of those visits that one of those guys that either commits to another school early and Notre Dame stays on him, and they get him on campus for an official, and they get him on campus for a game day, and eventually the offense that he sees ends up being the difference in saying, okay, now I really feel comfortable in making that jump. And so one thing I've been hearing with, of course, all of these recruits that have been coming in is that the parents are absolutely sold. I mean, that goes without saying, right? Parents and mothers are always going to fall in love with Notre Dame. But eventually, you know, for a kid like this, fit on the field is going to matter. Him being able to see himself. And I've heard a lot of players, especially offensive talents, whether it's quarterback, wide receiver, running back, that have been able to watch practice and have seen a different offense that they've seen at Notre Dame in the previous 2 seasons. So now that's really having an impact even on the official visits. Being able to see that, being able to see young wide receivers get an opportunity, get reps, and make plays. That's very encouraging for wide receivers that might have a question and have to face and deal with negative recruiting from other schools saying, look, Notre Dame, wide receivers don't go there. They don't get developed. That's not going to happen. Notre Dame is doing an incredible job showcasing a lot of different things this spring in the midst of a quarterback battle that can have a positive impact on wide receiver recruiting and recruiting on the offensive side of the ball at large moving forward.
To paint the picture too, a lot of people, I've been getting some question about, well, you know, yeah, they grew up in Oklahoma, but look what they did. You know, look what the Sooners did last season. Why would they not want to come up to Notre Dame? Why would a kid like Mason James not want to go and continuously compete for a national title like what we believe that Notre? You have to think about what Mason James grew up watching. While he was growing up and started to get into football and started watching football, he's watching guys like CeeDee Lamb and Hollywood Brown and Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and guys like that go through their time at Oklahoma. And so that is just another factor. That and Oklahoma is just a really big brand. So it's not just as easy as saying, well, hey, look what Notre Dame did in 2024. You should be up in South Bend. It's okay. Well, look what Oklahoma did from 2015 until 2021, really. You know, so you can sit down and you can really look and see what all goes into that decision for a kid like Mason James. Shaun, when you look at his film, what are some of the things that stand out to you? And why do you believe that he would be a really good fit in Notre Dame's offense?
Explosive. Just flat out, an explosive kid, 5'11", 175. The trend for the 26 wide receiver core, a group of recruits, explosive, and can make plays after the catch. This is something that Mike Denbrock loves to be part of his offense, something we saw him do with Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, and Malik Neighbors. Explosiveness, route running, precise route running. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show with what Mike Denbrock wants from his receivers, but then able to take a 5 yards, shallow cross and take it 70 yards to the house, take a quick slant, elude some tacklers and defenders, and get a 20, 25-yard gain in a big situation. This is the excitement, and this is the explosiveness that this young man can bring to your offense. I think in this offense, he would be more of a Jordan Faison type player. And you can never judge. It's so many kids that we look and we say, okay, he looks like a 4.5 guy. It looks like a 4.4 guy. And then all of a sudden, you get them to campus, and it's like, oh, he's faster than I thought. And so it's very rare that you have guys like Cam Williams, just watching Cam Williams run and film and in person at the Irish Invasion. It's like, okay, he can fly, right? But other guys like Mason James, we just assume that he's going to be fast from the 40 time standpoint, but he plays fast. I don't care what his 40 time is. He plays really fast. And so I think he's going to be a really good special teams asset when he gets to Notre Dame, if he decides to come to Notre Dame or wherever he goes. And then he's going to be a really good slot receiver and a guy that can take some jet sweeps and some other plays where you just get the ball in his hand and allow him to make plays. So he's explosive, he's a playmaker, and then he adds special teams value to your squad.
You know, Shaun, it seems like whenever you and I sit down and we talk about Notre Dame wide receivers and what they need in their upcoming classes, there's always a common theme, and it's always talking about what they can do after the catch. Having those elite level playmakers at Notre Dame, we're starting to see it. We saw it with Jordan Faison throughout last season, what he's able to do after the catch. We saw it against Georgia. We saw it in moments against Penn State. We saw it with Jaden Greathouse against Penn State and Ohio State. But that's kind of one of the things that Notre Dame has been lacking. We sit down and we talk about, you know, Brian and I talk all the time about some of Notre Dame's pass receivers and who are just the most exciting to watch. And the common theme that they all have is they were able to make plays after the catch. You think about Will Fuller in 2014. I mean, you give that guy a bubble screen, excuse me, that might go 50 yards to the house. You know, you think about guys like a Golden Tate. We talk all the time about Rocket, you know, and some of the great Notre Dame wide receivers that have came before some of these new wave of receivers are coming in, and they were all able to have ability after the catch. That's something that stuck out to me about Mason James as well. Sticking along the offensive side of the football here, another player that was on campus, I believe this past weekend, was quarterback Malachi Ziegler. And he is a 6'3", 200-pound kid. How did his visit go, and what were some of the things that stuck out to you from his film that you got to see, Shaun? And all in all, how did everything go this weekend with Ziegler?
Well, my co-host would probably be the guy to ask about the differences in the quarterbacks in 27. You got a Trey Taylor, Peter Bork, Malachi Ziegler, Jamison Purcell, a local kid from Chicago as well that was on campus last week. And, you know, in ranking those, for me, Trey Taylor reminds me of a CJ Stroud type. Malachi Ziegler reminds me of a guy. The comp I'm stuck on right now, but he, along with Peter Bork, I would rank them as the better playmakers of the 27 quarterbacks. Like guys that are just winners and just find a way. Because Malachi Ziegler probably plays on the worst team out of all the quarterbacks. He's not surrounded by as much talent. Carmel Catholic is a power in Chicago. That's a really good program. Trey Taylor has talent around him. Peter Bork up there in Massachusetts, also big-time program, has talent around him. Malachi Ziegler is doing the most with the least. And so that's very intriguing with him because he's still able to shine and stand out without having the requisite pieces around him. So that's intriguing for Mike Denbrock, but he's also a great dual sport athlete, great infielder for the Benton Tigers baseball team. He specifically said, I'm not playing baseball this year because this offseason is very important to my development as a quarterback. So as much as I love baseball, is his first love. And he said, as much as I love baseball, I'm deciding to sit out this season to make sure I develop so that I can commit early and then help my recruiting class come together wherever I choose to go. And so all of these kids are very mature. When you're dealing with these quarterbacks, they're very mature. Trevor, because the quarterback situation in recruiting is sped up and different than any other position. Like people are wondering why Notre Dame is going about this a lot slower than other programs as far as extending offers. They're doing their due diligence, right? They're going to go see all of these young men after the blue and gold game and spring camp and everything. They're going to go see these guys throw in person and then make their offers in May. My thought process is that they're only going to make 3 offers. Out of all the kids that come in, they're probably going to offer 3 to 5 kids at most. And then from that group, they're going to have their pecking order of guys that they want. And then you can expect one of those guys to commit sometime this summer to get a jump on the 27 class. But just talking about Malachi Ziegler, like I said, he's so focused right now on becoming the best quarterback that he can be. He spent time with both Mike Denbrock and Gino Guidugli. He said he's very comfortable with what he saw. Notre Dame runs very similar plays to what he runs in high school. They just use a different terminology. But standing there with Mike Denbrock and talking through the offense, the whys and where would you go and what decision would you make, he felt very comfortable. He said, going around, let's take a step off the football field. He said Notre Dame just felt like you could feel how majestic it is. That was the word he used. Like you walk around the campus and you can just feel it's a majestic place. So he fell in love with every aspect of Notre Dame on his visit. Home run for Notre Dame. They became a big-time competitor for the services of Malachi Ziegler. Louisiana kid, so of course LSU, Texas A&M, just to name a few of some of the big-time programs in on him. And I think he's going to pick up even more big-time offers to kind of load up, because Peter Bork and Trey Taylor, as far as offers, probably have more offers from the big-time programs, but Malachi Ziegler is definitely going to start stacking them up as you get through this spring and summer evaluation with camps and everything. So look for the Fighting Irish to be at the top of his list no matter what happens this summer. And Notre Dame, the staff, they did an incredible job this weekend with this young man. I stopped short of saying he was in awe, but it sure felt like talking to him. He was really in awe of what he saw, almost like he didn't know what he was stepping into. And then once he finally stepped into it and actually got to experience it, he was just really, truly overwhelmed. It just exceeded all of his expectations. So it was a great visit for Malachi Ziegler.
I was able to take a look at some of his film, and I think it speaks a lot to what you're talking about. He's a playmaker. Half of the highlights on his film is he's getting a bad snap, and he's able to make something out of nothing. He's a smart kid, and he knows where to put the ball. He doesn't put it in harm's way, but he's not this traditional dual threat. It's funny when you talk about quarterbacks. And the second that they see somebody is slightly mobile, they're automatically a dual threat quarterback, and so with a kid like Malachi Ziegler, the thing that stood out to me on film from him, he is pretty raw, and there's other things that he does need to work on as he moves forward, which is why I like the decision to stick and focus on football to become the best possible quarterback that he can be, because he is starting to generate a little bit more traction along the recruiting trail. We talked one time, I think it was one of the last RTCF shows that you and I did together, and we like to pay attention to where some of the other schools offer them are. And to me, when schools like a Texas show interest, when schools like Ole Miss offer you, that's something that kind of sparks and you keep your eye out for. Some of the other ones, sort of. He has an offer from Arkansas. He has one from Houston. He has one from Baylor. Notable programs, but when somebody from Ole Miss, like an offensive mind like Lane Kiffin, wants to offer a quarterback because they see what's there, you pay attention to it. When a school like Texas is paying attention to you, and they've had guys like Quinn Ewers go through their program, they've had guys like Arch Manning who's ready to step up and take leadership over that offense, kind of turns your head a little bit. For him, he's a little raw. I do like the base of his mechanics. One of the things that I always get worried about when you're a baseball player that also plays quarterback is how long your delivery is, especially depending on what position you play. My quarterback coach told me that one of the best positions that you can play if you're a dual sport athlete is catcher, because your release is quick. You don't have that long. You're not out here with it. You're really quick, short release. And so Malachi Ziegler, he has pretty good mechanics, still pretty raw. Ball placement could use a little bit of work too. But again, when you're a dual sport athlete, especially when you go from your junior to your senior year, those misses from, hey, you got to lead the guy out here, can't be behind here, those misses start to become a little bit more narrow. And that's what I like about Malachi Ziegler as well. They do run a similar concept to what Notre Dame does. I saw that on film as well. They run a lot of read zone. That's where some of the athletic ability that Malachi Ziegler has flashes, because he knows when to pull it, knows when to keep it. He has good decision-making when it comes to that. And so, yeah, I liked what I saw on film from him. So Notre Dame's quarterback recruiting approach, it might not be favorable by some, but I do know, according to what Brian said, is they are staying in good communication with all these kids. as well. Nobody's being left in the dark. They're able to get out and communicate with everybody, and they know what their process is moving forward. And so that is one thing that stands out to me as well. A couple of other players on offense that came out. Another one was Brian Bonner. He was on campus, and he's one of Notre Dame's top running back recruits and one of their top targets that they're looking at right now. So, Shaun, kind of walk us through what were some of the things that stood out to Mr. Bonner on his visit, and what are some of the things that stand out to him or that stand out to you when you watch
Dude, just all around back. Just all around back. All the backs that he brought in, Brian Bonner is probably the number one choice, all things being considered. I'm not sure where they truly sit in his pecking order. I think, in looking at his responses of how the visits went, it's not the same expletives or, declarations that others have made. But, Juwan Sire is good at what he does. And I'm sure that he laid out a plan for how he's going to be developed and how they're going to put him in a situation to not only take snaps away from his legs to make sure that he has enough going into the NFL and to prepare him for that next level. But then once again, this is a situation where the running back success, which you talked about as being perception, what comes with Notre Dame. The perception of running backs in Notre Dame is very successful. Whether you look at what the Notre Dame running back is currently, what they were able to do last year, what Audrey Estime was able to do the year before that, and heck, what Kyron Williams is doing in the NFL. Like the lineage of running back in Notre Dame is in pretty good shape right now. And so Brian Bonner would be a fool not to look at that and not to consider Notre Dame as a serious contender for his services to allow him to become the college football player that he wants to be. But, I think Brian Smith, he put up a really good post about Brian Bonner saying that, Notre Dame, first they got him on campus. He said they needed to get him on campus. They checked that off. Can they get him back for an official visit in the summer? That's going to be another check. And I think the official visit, in comparison to guys like Javion Osborne, who pretty much said, Notre Dame's at the top for me right now. Immediately after his visit and coming into the visit, we didn't think Notre Dame was anywhere close to being a serious contender. So this visit doesn't have the similar feel, but Notre Dame still feels like they're right in the mix. But it's going to be a lot to close the deal on a talent like Brian Bonner. Like you said, you look at his film, he can do everything. You look at his film, he can do everything. He can run between the tackles. He can outrun defenders. He's just a versatile running back. And now he's more in the picture now with a guy like Messiah Mickens, who has planned to visit Notre Dame, shutting his recruitment down second time after visiting Penn State last week. So now Messiah Mickens is off the board. Don't worry about him coming in. Now more resources may go towards a Brian Bonner that possibly weren't going his way from the Notre Dame staff and Juwan Sire. So it's going to be interesting to see how it progresses. Next step is to get him back on campus for an official visit and then see whether or not Notre Dame can close the deal and add him to what is already, like you said, we are recruiting from running back. We're recruiting from a place of strength. Like we can really, literally Notre Dame, Juwan Sire can pick and choose. This is who we want. And if we want to wait for a guy that might commit somewhere else early, we can wait and fight for him because we are six deep in this running back room. So it's a great place to be in.
Yeah, Brian Bonner is an explosive kid, and Notre Dame is not the only school that thinks so. Again, when you start talking about this kid's offer list, he has offers from Georgia, Michigan, Nebraska, Notre Dame, Penn State. And so when you start talking about some of those heavy hitters, you really start to see it's like, okay, there's a lot of people that see what his value is. Some of the things that stand out to me on film, his ball carrying vision is fantastic. He sees cutback lanes. He's really explosive with the football. And Shaun, like you said, he does a lot of different things well. Catches the ball well. They're starting to become a common trend of what Notre Dame is looking for at the running back position. You look at guys like Aeneas Williams. He's able to make plays in the passing game like we saw. Look at a guy like Nolan James. He's a very versatile back. Look at guys like Brian Bonner. He's starting to fit that mold. Jeremiah Love obviously fits that mold. And so there is now a new standard of what Notre Dame is wanting to do at running back. Even guys like Kedron Young, one of the things that jumped out to us in the spring, Brian talked about it in one of the previous shows, is that he's actually a pretty good pass catcher. You look at a guy who's 230 plus pounds. It's like, okay, He's an Audric Estime type. He's going to be between the tackles. He's going to be downhill. Man, that kid is light on his feet, and he can make plays in the passing game as well. And so Notre Dame is starting to look for that all-round type back, which is something that's really, really promising. But again, I love looking at offer lists of other kids, because I think that is you start to look at other schools that have a really good evaluation of talent. And you look at school. I mean, he has an offer from Tennessee. We know what they just did with Dylan Sampson. You know, I love looking at other players' offer lists to see what other schools are interested in them, because you can kind of tell. You have some schools that just kind of have that reputation. Yo, if you're a tight end and you have an offer from Iowa, Notre Dame should probably be looking at you too. If you're an offensive lineman that has an offer from an Iowa or a Wisconsin or a school like that, probably should be on somebody's radar. If you're a wide receiver that has offers from an Ole Miss, an Oregon, an Ohio State, you should probably be paying attention to you. You know, like I think of a guy like Braden Robinson. You know, everybody's, well, he's, you know, maybe 5'8". True, but Brian Hartline at Ohio State likes him. And that's why they have an offer out to him. And so that's why I like to pay attention to things like that as well. So definitely something to keep your eye on with a kid like Brian Bonner moving forward. Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball here, Shaun, Zach Ford, he's a safety from IMG Academy. And he, I believe you said, is currently committed to Georgia, but he also took an unofficial visit to campus, which again is big. Safety position, the defensive backfield for Notre Dame. It's one of those up-and-coming position groups that everybody should kind of be paying attention for, you know, nationally when you're paying attention and talking about Notre Dame. Yes, the offensive line is there. Linebacker has been there with guys like JOK and Jalen Smith and guys like that going through there. Running back is there. Defensive backfield is also getting there too. And when you have a kid that's currently committed to Georgia, using his own money to go up with his family and visit South Bend, I think that speaks volumes, Shaun. So kind of talk us through the visit and what kind of stood out to you for a kid like Zach Ford.
Well, the first and most important thing is the fact that they got him to visit. Once again, like you said, he's already committed to the Bulldogs. And so Notre Dame, honestly, Zach Ford, I remember doing a recruiting show last year, and the 26 kids were early kids that we were talking about, some of the offers that went out. And I remember saying, Zach Ford is one of my top 5 guys that I would love to see Notre Dame land in the 26 class. And this is before he had committed to anyone. I love the kid's film. I love his size. I love his versatility. And so now when he committed, it was a bummer to me, but Notre Dame kept working. Once again, we talk about Notre Dame figuring out that they are now transitioning in recruiting, and now they need to become the hunter in a different way, meaning that they stretch that out, you know, because you would see teams like Georgia, Alabama kind of sit back on kids, let everybody else make their offers, and then they would just pounce on the kids that they wanted, close the deal, and end up with these fabulous classes. Notre Dame is not there yet to be on the level of what Alabama did under Nick Saban and what Georgia has done under Kirby Smart, but they are transitioning from being that recruiting group that needs to get commitments early. They need to get out on these kids early and then hold on for dear life. Notre Dame, they want to get out early to establish relationships, get them in for unofficials and officials, close the deal, get the commitment, and then if they choose to go out and identify somebody that they would like to flip, now they have the audacity to go after that kid. And someone with the track record of Mike Mickens definitely is showing the audacity. How dare he go after a Georgia commit, especially in the secondary? That's what he's doing here. How dare he go and think he can get an IMG kid to come to Notre Dame? Well, he's doing it because he thinks he can do it to get this kid on campus for an unofficial, just to get him around, talk to him, continue to build a relationship that was always there, and see if you can get him back for an official. So now we wait to see whether or not he comes back for an official, because this is a kid that I think Notre Dame really wants. Like, you don't go after a committed kid. And once again, remember the days that Notre Dame wouldn't even let kids, well, this is an unofficial. So if he comes back for an official, still as a committed player, that's going to be very different than what we've seen under Notre Dame, who really wouldn't take official visits from kids unless they decommitted from that school before visiting officially. So I think Notre Dame is going through a transition period where they're figuring out, okay, now we can move to we had to do that way to get to this point. Now, if we want to go to the next level, we can do things a different way and be efficient with it. So to see Zach Ford get on campus, the relationship with Mike Mickens, long-standing relationship with Mike Mickens. You know, the kid loved the visit. We'll see. Now it just comes down to whether or not they did enough to make him open things up, not publicly, but open things up from a process standpoint to say, okay, I'm going to take official visits. Because kids like him, they just don't open it up for just one school. So if you start seeing him make official visits to other places, that means that, you know, he's really open to making a move, and that bodes well for Notre Dame at that standpoint to be able to get him back on campus for an official visit. Is it a long shot? It's Mike Mickens, man. I mean, it might be a long shot, but it's Mike Mickens. It is what it is, you know. And when Mike Mickens says this is a kid that I'm very interested in going to get, like Javari Flowers, the kid that reclassified, right? He was visited recently. He's going to make a decision, I believe, tonight. Most people think it's between Florida and Notre Dame, and most people are leaning towards Florida. But hey, Mike Mickens had the audacity to go after him as soon as he reclassified. Notre Dame wasn't in that fight, but Mike Mickens, when he wants somebody, he identifies somebody, and he goes after them. That's where he is. He's the best recruiter in all the college football, according to a lot of people, especially his position. That carries a lot of weight, and young men, 25, 26, 27, 28 classes, they're paying attention. So I think this young man, it's a good chance that he comes back for a visit. I don't know if I feel as good about him committing to Notre Dame, but I think Notre Dame has put themselves, you know, in a good position to even have a fight chance.
Well, I also don't think that it's a coincidence either that they're getting a Georgia commit to come up and take an unofficial visit a couple months after Notre Dame beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, the game that everybody said that Notre Dame couldn't win. So I think you're starting to see that trend as well. The success on the football field is starting to translate over now to the recruiting trail. But I really, really like what I saw from this kid on film. He flies downhill. He is an aggressive tackler. They blitz him a lot. He's comfortable making plays around the line of scrimmage. He's good in coverage too. There sometimes you can kind of see, you know, one of the things that we've talked about with a kid like Kennedy Urlacher is what can you do in coverage? It's no mystery that you have the hitting power and the prowess to play around the line of scrimmage, blow up plays in or around the backfield. That's not a question. But what can you do from a coverage standpoint? And when I watch his film, he kind of checks some of those boxes that you're looking for. He can do both. He can make plays in coverage. He can make plays around the line of scrimmage. But, man, he flies downhill. He fills the alley well, and that kid can hit. He is not afraid to stick his nose in there and get after it a little bit. And so that's something that I like as well. Shaun, are there any other recruits that visited this past weekend that stuck out to you or that Notre Dame left a really good impression on that we haven't covered yet today?
Well, it was good to see Dylan Faison, who's already committing the 26th class, back on campus. I'm sure that bodes well. This week was a prelude because the Monster Week honestly starts on Wednesday and then Thursday. April 2nd or Wednesday and Friday, I'm sorry. April 2nd and April 4th, huge. Go over to the message board at IB right now. Brian Driscoll put up a great intel piece setting up the importance of this week and giving some tidbits on what to expect and what to look for. And I'll just give some of the visitors coming in April 2nd, Jazeel Hart. We have a piece up on IB right now about Jazeel Hart, his relationship, a kid from the VA, from the DMV area. Mike Mickens got him. He's making a late push. Once again, Mike Mickens making a late push for a kid in the 26th class. You're talking about Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Michigan, Notre Dame, just to name a few that are really in his top schools. But he talks about building a relationship with Mike Mickens and getting to campus so he can see up close and personal what Notre Dame is all about. He talked about the Notre Dame defensive backs and what they did last year. He looks forward to watching those guys play. He loves to play man-to-man, and he can do everything. We watched this film, Trev, and we discussed him. He plays majority off man, but he's so instinctive, whether it's man-to-man, bump and run, off man, or zone. He's so instinctive in the way he plays. They blitz him a lot off the edge in the defense that they play. So he comes up and puts his nose in the run game as well. So Jazeel Hart will be on campus April 2nd. Another defensive end. Let me tell you something. Al Washington in this 26 class, I tip my cap. You're putting in work because the visitor list is absolutely insane this spring on the defensive line. Xavion Griffin-Haynes, another impressive defensive lineman in the 26th class, will be on campus April the 2nd. And then linebacker commit Thomas Davis Jr. will be back on April the 4th. Wide receiver Bubba Frazier, he's going to be here. You talk about run after catch, explosiveness. You'll get another one of those wide receivers on campus April 4th. And then some Illinois representatives in the tight end room. You'll have top tight end Max Suter, Isaac Vincent, and Evan Jacobson, class of 26. All three of those guys will be on campus on April 4th. And then teammates, Akeem Aboko and Ebenezer Etuade, teammates from South Garner out of North Carolina. They have relationships with the other top North Carolina guys. And so North Carolina is going to be a hotbed. We talked about Rodney Dunham on his visit, and he spent some time with Bryce Young, Micah Gilbert, and the other Carolina guys. And so we might end up seeing a lot of Carolina representatives on Notre Dame teams moving forward. They're doing a great job of mining the talent in the Carolinas as well. Including South Carolina. Drake Quinn, another defensive end, he'll be in town on the 4th. And then Chicago's own Mikael Blade. Mikael Blade, his Notre Dame was his top school for a long time, especially early on. He transferred to Simeon to play next to 25 fall commit. He'll be coming into the fall. Christopher Burgess Jr. on the defensive line. And then he got injured beginning of the year. He's rehabbing. He's back running. He's feeling good. He'll be back on campus. And Notre Dame is probably in a fight now with teams like USC, SEC teams now coming to the fray. But Mikael Blade has been very upfront. He's very comfortable being close to home. He looks forward to probably playing in the Midwest. And if you're going to get this kid out of the Midwest, it's going to take a lot from a team out west or a team in the South to get him to leave the comforts of the Midwest. But we'll see how Notre Dame is doing a great job. But they're in a place where they want him. But there are a lot of other talented defensive linemen on the board. So now the question is, do you say no to other guys to keep a kid like Mikael Blade that might not be ready to commit, say, early this summer, like some of the other kids, and he might want to take it into the fall? It's going to be very interesting, which leads to the next guy, Kari Wilder. Man, this kid is an absolute man. I think he's one of the most undersold. Like when you talk about defensive linemen in the 26th class, Kari Wilder is underappreciated from a ranking standpoint and how people see him. He's one of the best defensive linemen I've watched on film. I love the speed and the power that he plays with. He'll be on campus. Of course, a long-standing guy that Notre Dame has been connected to, Nick Reddish, the safety, 26th class. He'll be coming in. And then another DC guy, another DMV guy, Kari Adams, cornerback. I talked to him recently. He's excited about the visit. He's excited about the relationship. A kid that fits the mold of length at defensive back. He's around 6'2.5", 180 pounds. So he fits the mold. He'll be coming in to visit on April 4th. And then quarterback Peyton Houston, 27 class. Charles Roberts, the safety from the 27 class. And then Sincere Gaylord from the 27 class at cornerback. Fills out an impressive list of visitors for the 26 and 27 class on April 4th. That's the day before the scrimmage on that Friday. April 4th is going to be a huge day in recruiting for Notre Dame.
I'm excited for all of them to be on campus. One of the guys that stands out to me a lot is Jazeel Hart. We talked a lot about Notre Dame's recruiting and what they've done at the nickel position. And I think with how comfortable he is playing around the line of scrimmage, their defensive coordinator in high school right now, the willingness to send him off the edge, stick his nose in there, make plays around the line of scrimmage, but also not sacrificing making plays in coverage. To me, that makes him interesting because recruiting at the nickel position is going to be interesting. Now, with that being said, there are some true freshmen in this 2025 class that aren't yet on campus in Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary that I think could add their name, very well add their name to that mix. But as we all know, Notre Dame's gone to the portal 3 years in a row now with the addition of Devontae Smith from Alabama at that nickel position. So player like Jazeel Hart is definitely interesting, one to keep my eye on for sure, because I do think that that is a position that eventually Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens and Chris Ash will want that to be a homegrown position. But right now they're batting 1,000 as far as I'm concerned, as far as portal players that they got from there.
You know what's so amazing? I think I had this conversation with Brian. I said, man, I don't know if teams are starting to recruit kids as nickels now. That's what I'm starting to wonder. I'm gonna do some more digging. Like, are you evaluating kids because of the importance and how the game has changed? To now, you look at high school kids and say, that's our nickel moving forward. You know, usually you just recruit guys and whomever can't play one of the outside positions. Now you try to cross train them inside at nickel, and that's how you end up with your guy. That was Tariq Bracy, right? You get Tariq Bracy in. He's a freshman. He plays outside. And then they get him to feel comfortable playing inside, and they went got some other guys to play on the outside. So for me, I'm very interested in whether or not, like you said, you look and you see, okay, he's not Kyrie Adams as far as length and size. So he's a perfect nickel the way he plays right now because he's really good in zone coverage. He can play man, and then you can blitz him and do all of the things. He defends the run well. So he fits the modern day nickel for a defense and for what the game does. So True, just spot on with that. And I'm sure, you know, you don't bring a kid in, just tell him as a freshman, you're going to be a nickel. You let them compete, you know, but you have it in the back of your mind as a coaching staff, like more than likely, he's going to be our guy as a nickel. And if you can build up 2 or 3 guys in recruiting like that, like you said, 2 or 3 years from now, Notre Dame won't need to go to the portal to get their nickel. So I agree with you.
Yeah, man, a lot of it's going to depend on like what defensive coordinator Chris Ash is going to want to do with his defense. Initially, it sounds like he doesn't want to jerk the wheel too much with the previous defensive coordinator. Now, he's going to have his own terminology for things. He's going to call things differently in games, but he's not coming in saying, hey, guys, I know for the last 3 seasons, the nickel was a starting position on this defense, and now we're just switching it up, and they'll rotate, and we're going to go back to more like the rover style, like with what we saw with Clark Lee or a Mike Elko. But really, once Marcus Freeman came in, that's kind of when the nickel became a starting position on Notre Dame's defense, and I think that sounds like initially that might be here to stay, and a guy like Jazeel Hart fits that description. Also, so does a Mark Zachary, so does a Dallas Golden, but that doesn't mean that they can't play field or boundary corner either. And that's what I really like about Notre Dame's recruiting in the secondaries. They're getting guys that can play multiple spots. It's not a, hey, you're just going to be our boundary corner, and that's just where you're going to be. And so for all of those reasons, I like what Mike Mickens is doing and what he has been doing now for the last couple seasons in South Bend. Well, listen, folks, that's going to do it for the recruiting portion of today's show. We covered a lot of different topics. We talked about some of the visitors that have been on campus and the visitors that will be on campus, because this is going to be a really, really big week for that coaching staff, getting a lot of these guys back on campus, getting to meet and sit down and talk with them and their families. It's going to be huge. We're getting ready to transition over to the team portion of today's show. But listen, folks, before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Listen, you heard us talk about it a lot with all of the recruiting intel pieces and a lot of the different pieces that we've worked really hard for and put on the boards. You can see it scrolling down there at the bottom of your screen. If you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com, check out the Champions Lounge. That's where a lot of this great intel is going to be, especially with the big week that Notre Dame has coming up. Be sure to subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Shaun. We are now going to talk about the team portion of today's show in RTCF. And we are going to focus on, it's actually a piece that Notre Dame or that ESPN had put out. They put it out last week, and they're rolling with their Way Too Early series. And ESPN has released a bunch of different, potential breakout players for their Way Too Early top 25. They put out a Way Too Early top 25 rankings. In their latest edition, they put out what are the potential and perceived strengths and weaknesses of all of their Way Too Early top 25 teams. Notre Dame in all of these lists has always came in around that 4 to 5 range. And on this list, they came in at number 4. And they talked about what some of the potential strengths and weaknesses of this team are. Some of it hot topics of conversation. Shaun and I are going to break down the strengths and the weaknesses. And where we're going to begin is the weaknesses. And in the article itself, the quote was their weakness potentially was quarterback. And they went on to say perhaps weakness is the wrong word here. Marcus Freeman likes what he has to work with at the position, but after 2 straight years with veteran quarterbacks from the portal, Notre Dame will turn to someone without much playing time under his belt in 2025. And the only 2 quarterbacks that were mentioned in the article were Steve Angeli and CJ Carr, something that's been typical of what we've seen from the national media. But they go on to say Steve Angeli has a leg up based on experience, even though he doesn't have much of it. A redshirt freshman CJ Carr has a chance to be special. The battle to see who leads this offense will be among the most watched in all of college football, and finding the right answer might be the biggest obstacle between now and another playoff bid for Notre Dame. So, Shaun, when we have the conversation around what the perceived weaknesses are for this team, I always like to begin with the why. And what have the perceived weaknesses been for Notre Dame? And it's no secret to me that in this article, they put out something from the offense. And I think the notion for Notre Dame since 2022, which albeit there is some truth to it, but a lot of people believe, especially in the national media, that Notre Dame is an Iowa-esque type of team, not known for their passing game, good tight end play, good offensive line play, good running back play, dominant defense. And that is what the mantra has been for Notre Dame really for quite some time. And it dates back before 2022. But 2022 especially is kind of when we started to see that with Notre Dame. Because even Iowa at times, when they played inferior competition, would put up passing numbers. But then once they got into Big Ten conference play and they're playing the Penn States of the world, the Ohio States of the world, now the Oregons of the world, their passing offense was almost non-existent, which is something that we saw from Notre Dame in 22 and 23. 2024, the narrative started to change a little bit, but even before 22, sparingly you would see it, but 2017, Notre Dame was a running team. I think we can all agree on that. But then you look at years like 2015, even as bad as the team was in 2016, the passing offense was one of the few bright spots of that team. You look at 2019, you look at 2018, and this team has been able to run or pass the ball before in the past, but it's been at an inconsistent level. And Shaun, I think that's a healthy spot to start this conversation when we talk about why the offense is viewed as the weakness of this team, specifically at the quarterback position. There's a lot of different aspects that we'll kind of go and break down. But Shaun, what are some of your initial thoughts when you saw the article, you saw the piece that I put out about the offense kind of being the focal point of the weakness of this football team?
It's ironic that you say that because as you were talking, Trev, I thought back to the last time Notre Dame was in the national championship game with an offensive-minded coach, and the perception was still that the offense was the weakness. See, because remember, Marcus Freeman takes a lot of blame for that perception, but the offensive-minded coach that was at Notre Dame previous to him had the same issue as far as perception of the offense being the weakness on his best teams. And so is that directly connected to the quarterback position? Is it connected to the wide receiver position, which both of those positions are kind of interlocked in a sense? We talked about it previously. If you see wide receiver development at a school, more than likely they have pretty good quarterback play on the college level. Like they usually go hand in hand. Ohio State quarterbacks are pretty successful in college. I can't speak to what they do in the pros, but in college, they're pretty good. Hence, USC, pretty good quarterback play for the majority. Texas, LSU, Alabama. Those teams might not produce NFL top-tier talent. Clemson, wherever you see wide receivers, the quarterback play for the most part on the college level is pretty good and good enough to be a contender or in contention for a national championship. So I think that within itself could be one of the tipping points to why that quarterback and wide receiver position has not been solved consistently at Notre Dame. It could also be, let's go to the booth. what have the list of offensive coordinators been at that time at Notre Dame? Have they been guys that have been willing to push the envelope, or they get out ahead of trends and become the trend that everyone else follows? Iowa has a fantastic, I think Iowa has one of the best head coaches in the last, at least a top 15 coach in all of college football, right? But it's safe to say, because of loyalty and some other factors, nepotism, he might hold the program back. Kirk Ferentz might hold the program back because he's unwilling to let go of what he has been able to build with, to reach into the darkness and the unknown to see if he can go ahead and move the program forward, right? And so that is the challenge that faces Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman, in my opinion. Marcus Freeman, has been successful to the point of getting to the national championship without having a high-octane offense that takes chances. Is he willing to kind of step away from that O-line, D-line driven team and program? He's always said that. That's fine. But now that you have more able passing quarterbacks, according to a lot of people outside and within the program, now let's see if you can take that next step forward. Are you willing to take a chance on 3rd and 3rd and 2 and throw the ball down the field instead of just handing it off to your running back? We'll see. Are you more willing on 2nd and 4 to go ahead and play action and take the big shot down the field than you were in previous years? Those are things that bear watching. That's it. Those are things that bear watching. But I think, going back to my original point, if you solve the quarterback situation, that in turn will lead to the wide receivers possibly developing and being better. And then quite possibly that perception can change. But you're right. When you said it, we were talking pre-show, I was like, man, I guess there is kind of a correlation to Iowa and Notre Dame in that sense. And when you said it, I was like, how dare you on the inside? Like, Iowa? Like, they don't even compare to Illinois. That's just me in my Illinois-Iowa, rivalry, kicking in. But, really taking a step back and really thinking about it, like, you're right, because they match up in a lot of different ways. But, as we'll talk about from a positional standpoint, I think Notre Dame, from a coaching standpoint, in 3 to 4 years, you can change perceptions. We've seen it. We've seen the defensive back perception in Notre Dame change in 3 to 4 years. And now the impact is being felt on the recruiting trail in the 26 and 27 class already. We've seen the perception of, look, it was the same thing I said last year. I loved Aldrich Estime, but I couldn't wait for him to get out the way. I was like, okay, Aldrich, go to the NFL. Please don't come back. Go to the NFL. I love you, but I'm ready to see Jadarian and Jeremiah and the rest of this talent. It's the same way. Look, we all love J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser. What they represent for Notre Dame at the linebacker position, Jack Kaiser playing the most games ever for a Notre Dame player, who he is, the leader he is. But, man, I can't wait to see Drake and KVA line up next to each other. I can't wait. Okay, I can't wait. And I know Notre Dame fans can't wait. And so that is, I think Marcus Freeman has brought an aspect of what existed was good, but we're pushing the envelope to change the narrative. And they've done that at linebacker, because I think the narrative for Notre Dame linebackers outside of Jalen Smith was solid thumpers. Long, athletic, versatile linebacker play at Notre Dame, that's something new, right? Lockdown defensive backs in Notre Dame, that's something new. What we've seen at safety, Kyle Hamilton, Xavier Watts, you can go all the way back. There was a gap there from Harrison Smith to get to the recent success. But now you start, that's why getting Zach Fort on campus to allow him to see and feel those things was vitally important. So perceptions can be changed, right? And look, I'll be honest, Trevor, I've been a fan of Notre Dame longer than you, but we've had fandom that intersects. 4 or 5 years ago, If you told me Notre Dame was going to have the top passing defense in all of college football and not have their best corner that's ready to be a top 100 pick, and they're still going to be able to do it with a freshman and a sophomore, have lockdown corners, I'd have been like, man, you're playing the game. What you talking about? You made a player or you created players or NCAA? Is that what you're talking about? But it exists now. It exists now. And so as much you can have a trepidation about the offensive side of the ball and what can be and say, well, I don't see it or I don't think it's possible. But hey, we didn't think having the linebacker and defensive back narrative change was possible either, right? The next thing is what's going to change on the defensive line, because we're seeing the recruiting that could lead to the defensive line narrative changing at Notre Dame in 2 to 3 years. We're seeing it. Now, they still have to seal the deal in getting the commits, but if they do get these commitments, that D-line narrative is going to start to shift and change at Notre Dame. And so we're seeing it on the defensive side of the ball. Now we have to see it on the offensive side of the ball at two positions like quarterback and wide receiver. Can it happen? We'll see. However, you just open your hearts and your minds to the capabilities, regardless of how you might feel, Let's just see.
I agree. And look, here's my thing with Notre Dame's offense and where you need to get to. When I sit down and I look at Notre Dame's offense and what Marcus Freeman's ideology has been for this offensive team, offensive line, defensive line driven, take care of the football and all that's true. I look at it as an and. I think that there's this belief that you have to be one or the other. And looking at the facts, Notre Dame made it to the national championship with the 100th ranked pass offense in the country. I'm not saying that Notre Dame has to come out and be 2019 LSU. I'm not saying that Notre Dame has to go out and be like what year was it that he was when Western Kentucky had like the #1 pass offense in the country, whatever year that was. It was recent. I'm not saying that they have to go out and be that. I'm not saying they have to go be the Big 12 from 2014 to 2017 where there was just no defense played and every quarterback passed for 450 yards a game. It's an and to me. It has to be a viable threat, not something that you have to go to when the game dictates it as such. Like we saw in the Penn State and Ohio State game. When Notre Dame had to come out and pass the ball, they were very successful. Where I like to see the transition, it is no longer becomes a necessity. It is now just a running part of your offense. It's just a part of your offense. It's like, hey, listen, we can hurt you in both ways. Our passing offense can hurt you when it has to. And that's the way that I look at it. A couple of other smaller things that I noticed for, why Notre Dame's, perceived weaknesses, their offenses. There are some other applicable things that are going on right now in the spring that I think that are noteworthy that the defense doesn't really have going on. Right now, injuries and pitch count are kind of a big thing for Notre Dame's offense right now. You go through and you look at, a lot of their offensive linemen are either still coming back and recovering from injury or are limited participants in practice. You have guys like Emil Wagner who are, depending on the day, participating, not participating, because the kid played over 1,000 snaps in 2024, right? You have guys like Ashton Craig, he's battling back from a knee injury. He was the starting center to start the year, and the center that replaced him is no longer in South Bend. You have guys like Billy Schrouth, who's kind of taken their time coming back. He got his ankle cleaned up, and he's not a full go yet participant in practice. You have Anthony Knapp, your left tackle, who started 15 games for you as a true freshman. He is also on a pitch count. He got some things with his injury cleaned up, and also he played 800-900 snaps last year. And so all of those factor in. Not only does Notre Dame have an ongoing quarterback battle, which is, I would make the argument, the most open quarterback battle going on in the country right now. Not only do you have that, you now also have an offensive line that's not quite put together. You have a receiving core that's not quite put together yet. Yes, Jaden Greathouse is there, but Jordan Faison, he's splitting time between football and lacrosse. Malachi Fields isn't on campus yet. The younger receivers also need to continue to develop. Will Pauling is still nursing his foot injury, and he's kind of working his way back into the rotation. And so there are a lot of question marks sprinkled throughout, but the one consistent is their running game, which also feeds into that national narrative and what the perception is of Notre Dame. Passing offense is a little iffy. We don't really know what that's going to look like. But, man, look at that running back room. And that's constant with a lot of what people believe Notre Dame's offense is. And then another smaller ingredient is a lot of some of the big-name offensive players aren't yet on campus. Malachi Fields is finishing up his degree at Virginia. Will Black is not yet on campus. James Flanagan is not yet on campus. So I think some of that perception could have been changed a little bit if some of those guys were already here. If we were seeing Malachi Fields go through drills and one-on-ones and 7-on-7 in the spring. Because I think that wide receiver room starts to look a little bit more put together. I don't know if you have as many question marks along the offensive line, especially at left tackle, if a high-caliber recruit like a Will Black is in there and you see him taking reps. Because right now what everybody sees is Charles Jagsaw at right guard and Emil Wagner and Gerby Lambert kind of rotating in at right tackle. So then there's a question of, okay, well, what are you doing at the left tackle spot? You waiting for Anthony Knapp to come back? Is Styles Prescott giving a legitimate chance? Is Gerby Lambert getting enough reps there? Whereas I believe that if you had a guy like Will Black, he's coming in day one and he's taking reps at left tackle. So I think all of those have a mix of ingredients as to why Notre Dame's offense is still perceived as the overall weakness of this team. So it's going to be interesting to watch it all unfold, especially as the summer gets here, once fall camp gets up, fully ramped up, because that perception could quickly change depending on when they name the starter, what Malachi Fields looks like when he gets here. But one thing that I've noticed in all the media sessions that Notre Dame has been having this past week is I have noticed that all of the players, one thing that they consistently mention is how much more comfortable they feel in Mike Denbrock's offense this season, opposed to a year ago where they're learning all of these different things. They're drinking out of a fire hose. It's, they do so much pre-snap. Eli Raridan in his media session talked about how different it was pre-snap, how many different things you have to be aware of before the ball is even snapped. Now those things are starting to become second nature to a lot of these players that are able to play a lot faster. Now, I think that's a difference, big difference that you could see in this offense in 2025. And so that's kind of where it leaves us off with the weaknesses. And that's what this article had talked about. And there is some validity to what they talked about. On the flip side of the coin, they also highlighted what the strengths were. And this also, amongst Notre Dame fans and members of the message board, also sparked some interesting conversation. Because, again, if I were to ask you what the strength of this team is, I think a lot of people would say, well, man, they got Jeremiah Love and J.D. Price and Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young is up and coming. Nolan James is a good recruit that they just got. Jabron Payne is back from injury. They have Juwan Sider. Going from Dylan McCullough to Juwan Sider is, man, that's a good spot to be in. But what ESPN put out, also sticking with what a lot of people believe the national narrative is they put down the strength of this Notre Dame team is their defense, specifically the secondary. And in the article, they said the strength is their secondary. Losing Xavier Watson, Ben Morrison might be a huge red flag at a lot of schools, but not at Notre Dame, where the defensive backfield remains elite. Start with sophomore corner Leonard Moore, who established himself as one of the top young prospects in the country last season, allowing less than 40% completion and racking up 11 pass breakups and 2 picks. Christian Gray was a solid performer on the other side, while Adon Schuler blossomed at safety. Notre Dame added a solid option at safety in Virginia Tech transfer Jalen Stroman. The back end of the defense should be the strength of this unit, just as it was a year ago. And so I think there's a lot of people that were shocked at seeing that. But if you just take a step back, and as hard as it is to do, because I struggle with this sometimes too, if you take the Notre Dame hat off and you go through and you start talking about defenses and team strengths, when somebody returns their boundary corner, their field corner, their boundary safety, and then the 2 players that you had to replace from the starting lineup in that secondary were Jordan Clark. You replace him with a guy like Devontae Smith from Alabama. And then you go and you replace your safety position with Jalen Stroman, a guy who was getting some outlets believed he was getting some day 2 draft grades, depending on what he did in 2024. Unfortunately, his season was cut short due to injury. And then behind him, you have guys like Luke Talich and Kennedy Urlacher and Bronte Johnson. Oh, and a 6'5" true freshman in Jadon Blair. I think that sparks a healthy conversation around, yes, the secondary is a strength of this team. And the way that I look at it, and Shaun, I don't know if you look at it any differently, but the way that I look at it, just because the secondary is a strength of this team, it does not mean that the running back room is not a strength of this team as well. I think just the new reality and the new era that Marcus Freeman is in right now is there is multiple position groups on this team that are the strength. But I think ESPN put out this article because the national narrative is Notre Dame's defense is really, really great and plays at an elite level. The offense needs to catch up with it. So, Shaun, what do you think, and what did you think when you saw the secondary as the strength of this team?
I made sense, but I think that's, once again, you have to take everything into perspective. The objectivity is lost a little bit when you expand things to the national media that really don't follow the team as closely as we do in some other outlets that cover Notre Dame on a daily basis. And so you have to take that into context. I mean, you have to contextualize that when you're reading what they write. Same thing when you hear the reports of Steve Angeli and the leader he is, and, all of that. It's like, that comes from, or is the fruit of the same tree. I won't call it a poisonous tree, but it's fruit of the same tree that yields or comes from the lack of access. It's like, what else do you have to talk about? We all get a look at, the fullness of everything when the curtain goes up Saturday morning. It's coming up. And I think everybody's excited about that. But as far as, that perception, I don't have a problem with the secondary being a perception, because that's something that Notre Dame has changed. That is something to be proud about. That is something that obviously has locked in with the national media. Like, it wasn't the case, but now the national media has no choice but to admit, okay, Notre Dame has kind of shown over the last 3 to 4 years that this secondary thing for them is becoming a thing. Right. And it continues to be a thing in recruiting. And so we have to give them their just due. And it's their biggest strength, because the guys they have coming back did it without the best guy they had, who was injured. So what else can you say? For those conspiracy theorists that want to feel like ESPN has it out for Notre Dame, that kind of feeds into that a little bit by them going with the secondary. But the running back room is not as sexy. It's kind of similar to what I said about the quarterback position. Like, don't overreact to a certain quarterback not being mentioned as much as the other two, because he's not a bigger story. The young freshman is the bigger story, right? The grizzled veteran that's been around is the bigger story. That's more clicks. The guy that's in the middle, he's not the sexy one. He's the guy that was added late. Like, he's not the biggest story. So he's not going to get the most attention, and he's not going to have the most articles written about him. But it doesn't mean a thing when they step on the football field. They control that. You can only write about what you can see, what you hear, and what you attain through sources. And so it's the same thing with, national media and what they say about Notre Dame. They have to have sources inside the program, and the program is going to promote what they want to promote. They're going to promote the bigger stories. And we have to understand that as fans, and not fall prey to, just being upset about the things that are put up. This is low-hanging fruit from ESPN. The secondary, no kidding. That's obvious. The running back room, no kidding. That's obvious. Dig a little deeper. What are some of the other strengths that are not as obvious that you would have to be around and know to talk about it objectively? And that's why, it was written the way it was written. It was covered the way it was covered. It was something they could put together really quick. And it was the low-hanging fruit that couldn't be denied in the secondary. If they had gone running back, I don't think either of us would have had a problem running back being the most recognized strength of this team. I don't think so. But I think for a long time, offensive line was considered one of the biggest strengths of Notre Dame teams. And the record bears that out. As you see these guys matriculate into the NFL and be successful, I think someone put a graphic out, Notre Dame, by a margin of like 50 to 60 games, has the most starts by offensive linemen out of any other college in like the last 10 years. That's impressive. That's not O-line U. I don't know what is, right? But if they had a Blake Fisher and Joe Alt returning, then maybe the national media would grab that low-hanging fruit and put the offensive line as the biggest strength. So, you take it with a grain of salt, but I think we agree and won't push back on the secondary. You can argue for the running back, but I don't think anybody is like, take the secondary down. There's no reason they should be up there. And like you said, Mark Zachary, Dallas Golden, and all the Creed Thomas, who's once again, shocker, a freshman defensive back is being talked about performing in spring camp. Shocker. Where have we seen that before? The last 2 or 3 years at Notre Dame. So you expect nothing different. You absolutely expect nothing different. And I'm not shocked that secondary was, the group that was identified by the national media as being the biggest strength.
Well, I think it's also, you look at the secondary has 3 starters coming back. The running back room has, for all intents and purposes, a starter coming back. That doesn't mean that J.D. Price couldn't go somewhere else and start. Doesn't mean Aeneas Williams wouldn't be RB1 at a bunch of other different schools. But I think some of that also plays into it as well. Shaun, you mentioned something that was kind of interesting that I wanted to touch on too, is yes, that is the low-hanging fruit that what ESPN wanted to talk about. But Notre Dame does have a lot of other strengths going into the 2025 season that I think it's good to touch on and have a conversation about, man, because, it's easy to just read an article like that or sit back and take away. It's like, well, they have good running backs and a good secondary. What else does this team have? And it's a lot. And even in some of their weaknesses, and for those of you who are listening to the podcast, use heavy air quotes on that, for what the perceived weaknesses are, there are still strengths hidden within them. For example, I talk about the offensive line room not being put together. Here's the flip side of that coin. One of the reasons why it's not is because the room is so loaded that they're trying to figure out where the best possible position is for everybody. Because it would be easy, to your point, Shaun, if they just had a Joe Walton, Blake Fisher coming back. It's like, all right, well, left tackle, right tackle's taken care of. We just have to figure out, is Ashton Craig going to be healthy enough to start at center? In other years, Billy Strauss come back. It's like, cool, check off the left guard box. And then you really have a question at right guard, and then insert a guy like a Charles Jagasaw, insert a guy like a Sullivan Absher, but now this year, Notre Dame is in a spot where in previous seasons, Emil Wagner's a no-brainer right tackle. He started all 16 games for you. He has experience from Texas A&M to Ohio State as your starting right tackle. Well, guess what? This year, a kid in Gerby Lambert is pushing him for snap shares in camp and throughout practice. Why? Because he's so talented that can you leave a guy like Gerby Lambert off the field in 2025? I don't think that you can. And it's clear that the Notre Dame coaching staff also doesn't believe that either. Because in previous years, it would just be, to your point, if a Joe Walter or a Blake Fisher were coming back, those are just your guys. So even in some of these other weaknesses, there are strengths that are coming out about them. Quarterback competition, they don't have a starter named. And as much as I would, or as some other people would like to see, they're probably not going to name a starter after the spring. Like that's just, they're throwing to an incomplete receiving core right now. Not all of their offensive line is set. So there's a lot of different question marks up in the air. But with that being said, whoever starts at quarterback is going to elevate your passing game. Literally, no matter who it is, whether it's CJ Carr, Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, Blake Hebert. Look, you're going to have an elevation in your passing game from multiple different aspects. Now, caveat is you might be losing a little bit of the running ability, but you have a running back room that is, I would argue, the best in the country from a depth standpoint. Them, Penn State, we've had that conversation before. Pick whichever one you think is your one, and the one right behind it is 1B. That's just how it is for me. But even in some of their weaknesses, they do have strengths. Mike Denbrock coming back in year 2. It's another big one. Like I said, a lot of the players in their media session are sitting down and talking about how there's just so much more clarity with what they're doing this year. They're able to play a lot faster. And I think as the season went on, you got to see that a little bit. As the season went on, the offense looked faster. I mean, just the difference from before their first bye week to after their first bye week, I think was really telling. So, Shaun, I think that's a really good point about how, yes, the secondary, the running back room, those are the sexy strengths that you sit down and you talk about. But there's a lot of other ones on this team that you can go on and think about. So are there any others that I did not mention that you believe to be a firm strength of what this team is?
Well, I think the strengths of this team are the secondary, the running back room. I do think the offensive line is going to be a strength. I think it was fair going into 2024 that people had apprehension coming off of the Joe Alton, Blake Fisher era, saying, yo, we don't have any guys with experience on the offensive line going into this season. And then you lose your starting left tackle in fall camp. And then you see Anthony Knapp battle. You tip your cap because the young man, as a true freshman, had to battle. He really wasn't strong enough to really anchor. He struggled with some speed rushes as well, but he battled, and you got to the national championship game or the national semifinals with that young man as your starting left tackle. You were able to make do. My challenge is to Joe Rudolph is that's not good enough. Making do is not good enough. In order to get things done and go up against someone in the national semifinal again, and to have an explosive offense, you need a guy at left tackle that can do more than just battle and make do. You need someone that's going to be able to impose their will and dominate and make an impact. Is that going to be Anthony Knapp in year 2? We wait to see when he returns from injury. Will it be Will Black, the freshman, who I think coming in as a true freshman, if you had enough faith to start a true freshman at the beginning of last year on the road at Texas A&M, then have enough faith to start a more talented, in my opinion, a more talented freshman coming in on the road against Miami. If you had the faith to do it then, you most certainly can have the faith to do it now. And then, like you said, how do you keep Gerby Lambert off the field? How? So the evaluation should be, I don't want a guy at left tackle that's going to be middle of the road or just good enough. Who is that next Joe Alt? Let's find that guy and put him on his trajectory to become that moving forward at Notre Dame. If it's Anthony Knapp, put him there. If it's Gerby Lambert, put him there. If it's Will Black, put him there and let's rock, because he's going to have a veteran next to him more than likely in Billy Shrout. And then the rest of the line, if you end up with Emil Wagner and Charles Jackson on the right side, I'm good with that. Fine. If you end up with Gerby Lambert and Charles Jackson on the right side, I'm very good with that moving forward, right? So, yeah, I think the offensive line, differently from last year, is more than likely to be one of the strengths of this football team. You can say the same thing about the quarterback room, even though it's perceived as a weakness. I understand why it's perceived as a weakness for the snapshot that is right now, and then for the blow-up big poster that has been the last 2 years in Notre Dame at the position. I get it. You're not really choosing the quarterback room as low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, because it's a snapshot and a big picture that supports that. So I'm fine with that. We'll talk about this coming up. I do not perceive the wide receiver room to be a strength. I perceive the running back room to be a strength. Ceiling, now this is very interesting, Trev. I can't wait to see what you think about this. Ceiling of the tight end room could be a strength. But there's so many question marks and a little bit of unknown because of injury and depth. Could it be a weakness, especially in the passing game at that position? So that's a position that could go either way, right? Defensive line, you get the transfers. What are they going to do? They have to fill some big shoes. And the two guys that are going to be drafted into the NFL in a short time, right? They weren't elite guys, but they were highly productive and efficient, especially in as far as applying pressure, right? So we'll see if they can do that. We'll see if your guy, Amel Mukum, Jason Onye, if they take that next step. Someone questioned, like, why did Devin Houston move to the offensive line? And then I started naming all the names of the interior D line, and they were like, oh, I'm like, yeah, you go 8-9 deep before you get to Devin Houston. So that's why, the young man probably thought to himself, like, hey, if I'm going to get on the field, I might want to go play on the other side of the ball.
Sure.
So there's a chance that D line could play themselves into being a strength, right? Joey Botello, I don't know what we can expect from him, but Boubacar Traore, can he return to form? Then you have Logan Thomas. Does he take a step forward? Does Bryce Young take a step forward? Right? Taking a step forward for Bryce Young would be what? 8 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. That's a step forward, right? Logan Thomas, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. That's a step forward. And then you add in Christopher Burgess Jr. Maybe you get something from a Dominique Hula. Now you're starting to change that narrative, right? Slowly but surely. And so that could be not as strong as some of the other strengths, but it won't be a weakness. Something else I think both of us would like to see, can Notre Dame over the course of a season hold opponents under 100 yards rushing? Can we finally have a Notre Dame defensive line that can do that? That would be progress. That would be growth. That would start to change the narrative. I don't know if this defensive line is the defensive line that's going to do it, but when you look at the size and weight, Donovan Heinisch is really the only, air quotes if you want to, small interior player. Everybody else is close to that 6'1", 6'2", 300-pound range. Now you've changed the dynamic of what your defensive line used to look like just a couple of years ago. So now you're a lot more physical and a lot bigger up front with a lot more depth. So those are the areas in linebacker. Trev, I'll be honest. If somebody sat back and said, I think the biggest strength is going to be the linebacking core over the secondary, I wouldn't argue. I flat out wouldn't argue. You know why? Because you have pieces coming from outside the program that you think are going to fit in Devontae Smith and Stroman, but you don't know. All the guys in the linebacker room are yours. You evaluated, you recruited, you got them to commit, and you developed them. They're your guys, and they're all extremely talented. And if they take steps forward, watch out, which is connected to the defensive line, because if the defensive line takes a step forward, that impacts the linebackers. And they're already talented. Now you give them room to run and wreak havoc. Man, so things are changing. The perceived weaknesses for Notre Dame are turning into strengths before our very eyes, and it's a process. It really is. So
yeah, to me, a lot of the weaknesses are countered by the fact that the ceilings in those rooms are just so high. In years past, you kind of just look at the makeup of some Notre Dame rooms, and it's like they are who they are. But with this team, it's the fact that the narrative is starting to change is because the ceiling is so high. I mean, literally, if they just played at the same level that they played last season, there's a good bet that they make it back to the college football playoff semifinals, because that's what they did last season with that group of guys. And yes, I know that, guys like Riley Mills and Howard Cross talking about the D-line, they're not there anymore, but Riley Mills wasn't playing in this college football playoff semifinals. Howard Cross was at a generous 60% health in the college football playoff semifinals. Who are you replacing those guys with? Well, Jason Onye, 6'5", he's now over 300 pounds. Jared Dawson is 6'2", over 300 pounds. Elijah Hughes is 6'3", 290 some odd pounds. Brendan Vernon's up to 290 pounds. You were talking about the edge rushers. We didn't even talk about Josh Burnham, Junior Tuialamaka. Guys like that. Junior Tuialamaka ended the season as your second leading edge rusher in pressures. And there's a scenario where he is going to be struggling to get on the field again, not because of anything that he's done to himself, but because you get Jordan Botelho back, because you get Boubacar Traore back, because Bryce Young is now a sophomore, because Logan Thomas is now a sophomore, because Christopher Burgess is now in the mix. It's a spoil of riches. But the reason why they're weaknesses is we just haven't seen them do it yet. It's not a talent issue, and that's the difference. And that's something that I like. Sticking on the trend here, Shaun, of high ceilings, I want to talk a little bit about the wide receivers. And Mike Denbrock had some comments during their media session on Friday, both of the coordinators, which, by the way, last note on the D-line, even Chris Ash mentioned the D-line in a positive light. He was asked, was there anything positive so far that has really stuck out to you? And it was a good answer. It was a coach speak answer. But he was like, look, guys, it's early. I don't want to single out any one specific player, but I will say that D-line unit, specifically the interior defensive line unit, is significantly deeper than what I thought it was when I got here. Because he got to get on campus and see Jason Onye. He got to see Gabe Rubio. He got to see Donovan Heinisch. He got to see Armel Mukam. He got to see Jared Dawson. He got to see Elijah Hughes. So it's a really, really good spot to be in. Really good spot to be in. But Mike Denbrock did talk about the wide receiver room and some of the comments that he made. He was asked about young receivers stepping up. He was asked about, he talked about some of the wide receiver drops that had happened last season, talked about a lot of the things that he wants to step up and move forward with. One of the things that he said about the young wide receivers, he said, quote, yeah, I'm not ready to single anybody out. I just like the direction of the entire group. They just seem like their understanding of what we're asking them to do is at a whole other level than it was a year ago. Kind of gets back to the same discussion we started with. The details are so important in everything that we do. The things that they're doing and showing on the practice field now are way more detail oriented than what they were at any time last year, even at the end of the season. We've been able to make some progress just because of them understanding what to do better. And so, Shaun, I think that ties perfectly into the conversation that you and I are having about what the ceiling is. Let's just call a spade here. Notre Dame's wide receiver room has underperformed the last couple seasons. Notre Dame hasn't had a wide receiver finish with over 600 yards in a season since Kevin Austin did it back in 2021. So there's a lot of expectation for what this room needs to do in 2025 to take the offense to the next level. So thoughts on Notre Dame's wide receiver room, how young they are, and what some of Mike Denbrock's comments were from that media session?
I think his comments were comments out of frustration. They can be seen as scathing, or they can be seen as somewhat complimentary of what has taken place and the growth that has taken place this spring. But, I mean, just big picture, yes. I mean, your first job as a receiver is to catch the ball. Your first job. And as much vitriol was thrown to Riley Leonard, or as much that was laid at his feet for some of the inconsistencies in the passing game, Bo Collins just had, memorable drops. Jordan Faison had drops. Jaden Greathouse early had some big-time drops. He had a huge drop against Northern Illinois. So he was right. He was absolutely right. And so the understanding of the offense, the second year, Brian and I talked about it last week. Like, you look at the history of Mike Denbrock and his offense and the jump that it takes in year two, no matter where he is, you fully expect this offense to make a similar jump. And by that, the fundamentals allow you to be more efficient. If you are going to be fundamentally sound, it only makes your gift even better. It only puts a further microscope on the fact that you are talented. It makes it easy for your talent to come forth when you are fundamentally sound, right? Who wants to work hard, work smart, work efficiently, become a fundamentalist at what you do, and more than likely, it's going to make your job a little easier when you're trying to do it. And so things should be easier for Notre Dame. It should be easier to execute. especially in situations that should be easier to execute in the red zone, and it should be easier to execute a more balanced offense. And so that's really what, I think Coach Denbrock was trying to talk about in terms of what can be perceived. He does not want the wide receiving core to be perceived as a weakness. And I think he is pleasantly surprised by the group, the skeleton crew that he is working with during the spring. They are taking steps forward. He was asked about the guys. In that same session, he was asked who's taking a step forward. And he said, similarly to Chris Ash, I don't want to point anyone out in particular, but I like what the young guys and I like what the whole group has done this spring to necessarily catch the ball better, run better routes, and to be where you're supposed to be, right? Plenty of times you watch games and you say, man, why didn't Riley throw that ball? Why didn't he throw the ball? Well, was it on the offensive line and the early pressure that forced him to get off the spot early? Was it on the wide receiver not being where he was supposed to be when he went through the progression? It's a lot of different things, a lot of moving parts that makes a successful passing play in football, which is why your old-time coaches say, throwing the football is like it's so much bad that can happen when you pass the ball as opposed to just running the ball. So, I think there's talent in the wide receiver room. I do believe that the ceiling is ascending in the room. I'm not going to be hyperbolic and say, it's a super high ceiling in the wide receiver room. But bringing in someone like Malachi Fields, seeing what Jaden Greathouse did, seeing what Jordan Faison did in the college football playoffs, now it's about being able to put the pieces where they belong, right? I've always said Jordan Faison being your number one option that's not where he belongs in a wide receiver room. He's a playmaker. I love what he can do, but your wide receiver room is not going to be a good to elite wide receiver room if Jordan Faison is the number one option. It's just not. Now, if you bring Malachi Fields in and he's the number one option, or if he's the number two option, now you've elevated that room with that type of talent. And Jaden Greathouse could end up being the number one option from the slot or moving him around and just putting the ball in his hands. And so then the opportunities of a Micah Gilbert, right? If he can get back healthy, get back in the mix, a Cam Williams who seems to be ascending from all reports, KK Smith, once again, if he can stay healthy consistently and be on the field, you love what he can do from a route running standpoint and catching the football. And there are some other options coming in as well. So Will Pauling, dependable, was better 2 years ago than he was last year, I think most would say. And so if he could return to that previous form and give that type of effort and production in Notre Dame, it can be a 25 reception guy for Notre Dame. Then you're cooking with grease, but then again, you're talking about Will Pauling being a good, if he can be a somewhat 2-3 in your offense, and you pair him with what Jordan Faison can do, that's a great combination. So it's a slow process to change the narrative, right? And I think it's a process that's going to be directly tied to the quarterback changing the narrative as well. So that story will be written simultaneously, in my opinion.
There's multiple facets that go into changing the narrative of Notre Dame's passing game, and the wide receivers are absolutely a part of it. I think we can all agree that they underperformed last year. They also underperformed in 2023. They also underperformed in 2022. Like I said, the last Notre Dame wide receiver to end, wide receiver, not tight end, not just pass catcher, the last Notre Dame wide receiver to end the year with over 600 receiving yards in a season was Kevin Austin in 2021. The play has to be better. But I think it's also a healthy conversation to have that it's not just the receivers, just like it's not just the offensive line. It's not just the quarterback. It's not just the play calling. It's not, look, a good, well-oiled passing offense, all the ingredients are working together. It's not just one thing. I don't know if I've ever seen a passing offense where literally it's just the receivers that are bad. or just the offensive line that's bad and it not be successful. You know what I mean? I mean, you go through and you look at it's not college, but like you go and look at the Cincinnati Bengals in 2021. They made it to the Super Bowl, and Joe Burrow was sacked like 30 times just in the playoffs. But what did he have? Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and himself. You know, so it's all encompassing, and all of the pieces have to work together. And that's where I'm at with it. And the wide receiver room has a lot of promise, and their ceiling is really high. Some of it's just hard to gauge because they're not all there. I think we're having a much different conversation about this group if Malachi Fields is on campus right now. I really do. Because, yes, Jordan Faison he's out playing lacrosse right now. How is that different than the first 2 springs that he was around? You know what I mean? Like, how is that different from 23? How is that different from 2024? It's not. Jaden Greathouse is once again the leader in that room, and he's the leader going through rotations. That is copy and paste of what it was in 2024. It was. But if Malachi Fields was here, I think that narrative is different. If Will Pauling is 100% healthy, I think that narrative is a little different. One guy that you mentioned that really, really stood out to me was Cam Williams. And you start talking about getting familiar with the offense and playing with more clarity, and you're starting to see that with guys like Cam Williams. There's not as much thinking going on. It's now a little bit more second nature to now the athletic ability is starting to shine through the thinking. And it's cool to see the gradual transition of that process. I wrote a piece on Scrap Richardson, and he's making the transition from high school quarterback to college wide receiver. And he is literally embodying what that journey is. Everything has a thought behind it. Am I running this route properly? Did I get proper depth? Did I cut at the right time? Are my hands in the right spot when I'm catching the football? You can see all of that is kind of going through his mind a little bit. But when you just kind of see him running routes on air where they're just like, hey, dude, just go run a slant. Just catch the ball. The athletic ability is starting to show, which is, from what I've been told, what was going on with Cam Williams last year. The athletic ability was there. It's always been there. But now he's playing at a much higher, much clearer level. I'm not saying that Scrap Richardson and Cam Williams are going to be the same player, but that's just a testament to sometimes you just got to get your feet under you. Sometimes you just have to do that. And so I think all of that goes into it. But yeah, Mike Denbrock touched on the wide receiver play. He touched on how that has to be better. Go ahead.
Before we transition, one of the most important things that I think that he said that I think rings true, that kind of sums up what happened last year for him as the offensive coordinator, is that when you try to plug one hole and another hole pops open, and then you plug that hole and another hole plugs open. It's like there was never any continuity. When the wide receivers would be on, the offensive line would be off. When the offensive line was on, the quarterback was off, right? So there is no absolution in this thing for anybody. Quarterback wasn't good enough. Wide receivers weren't good enough. Offensive line weren't good enough. That's it. Period. That was it. Period. All three. And they all three impact one another in some way, form, or fashion. There were plays where wide receivers were open that the quarterback didn't get the ball to them. There were plays where the quarterback was ready to throw it, the wide receivers weren't open, or he threw it where it needed to be and they dropped it. There were plays where Riley Leonard was literally first step, second step, running for his life. There is no progression because you're immediately running for your life and the wide receivers are running routes like, what's going on? Yeah, your offensive line can't protect. That was the Notre Dame offense. Nothing was going right simultaneously for a long period of time. And that's on everybody. And all of that impacts the coordinator. Because your coordinator is trying to figure it out. But in order to figure it out, if the basics can't be done, which is what he's talking about. He didn't talk about anything spectacular. He's like, yo, we just have to make the plays that are 100 out of 100. If we can't be 100 out of 100 with that, that's basic football. The catches you're supposed to make and should make 100 out of 100 times, we weren't even doing that. So we can't even talk about the spectacular plays and the 50-50 balls and the run after catch. We can't get to that because we couldn't do the basics And we couldn't do the basics on the O-line. We couldn't pick up, for the first 5 games, we couldn't pick up a basic cross blitz to save our life on the left side of the offensive line. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. And so that is what Mike Denbrock had to deal with. And so we're talking about what came through for me, a big relief for him, because he sees those fundamentals that were missing now impacting how they practice. The recruits I speak to say the practice is efficient and fast. All of the offensive recruits, that's what they say about the practice. Man, they play fast. They play efficient. They move through practice. You know why? Because the basics are now becoming who they are. They're not trying to learn it. It's now who they are. It's their nature. And so now it impacts the way they can prepare, and it impacts their ability to execute come fall in camp and when the season starts. And then this is the last point that he made that I thought was absolutely fantastic. It doesn't matter as a wide receiver. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. When he said that, I said, okay, now we're cooking with grease. Doesn't matter who wins this competition. Do your job. Catch the ball, be where you're supposed to be, and get it done, regardless of who's throwing the football. That means he's putting everybody on notice. We're not doing this favoritism of who you think, no, regardless of who you think the quarterback needs to be. You do your job and catch the ball and block and run the right routes and be there for whomever is under center. That's your responsibility. And so that goes to accepting accountability and responsibility on the O-line, running back room, tight end room, everybody. Everybody. Because I feel like Mike Denbrock is probably like, yo, I have 3 quarterbacks that can consistently do what I'm asking them to do in the passing game. I have an offensive line that I feel like can now consistently do what we need to do, whether it's running the ball or pass the ball. These are the feelings he's getting in spring, watching these guys practice. Now I have a tight end room that didn't have Mitchell Evans to start the season. From what I saw at Pro Day, Mitchell Evans is still getting back to his original form athletically. I don't think he ever peaked during the season or in the playoffs. He's starting to do that. An NFL team is going to reap the harvest of that, in my opinion. The other tight ends, you lose Cooper Flanagan, dude. Eli Raritan, he's still coming back physically, trying to get back to his original form and that promise that we thought he had coming out of high school. So there's so many different moving parts to this offense being able to be more explosive, more efficient, to put up more points. Not just for game week to week basis. We know what it's all about, Trevor. You spoke to it when you talked about the comparison to Iowa. We do. We don't care about Notre Dame putting up 35-40 against a MAC team. We don't care about that. What are you going to do against Georgia? What are you going to do against Ohio State the next time? Okay, that's the one thing you haven't done against Ohio State. I mean, you did it coming from behind in the national championship game. But the one thing you haven't done is put up points early against Ohio State and give yourself a chance to put them in a position of chasing from behind in situations and being down double figures. Like, put them in that situation in a matchup and see how they react to it. Those are the types of things that Notre Dame needs to take a step forward in big moments offensively. And it's not just on one particular room. It has to be a group effort to do that, man. It really, even as much as we think these quarterbacks are better passers of the football, in a sense, they still need the offensive line to take a step forward. They're going to need the wide receivers to take a step forward. They're going to need the tight ends to get back to traditional tight end play at Notre Dame. All of that needs to come together. All of that needs to come together, because if we're going to just lay it at the feet of a first-time starter to be accountable and responsible for all of that taking place is a tad bit unfair, as it was unfair with Riley Leonard, as it was unfair to an extent with Sam Hartman. Like, it was a lot going on elsewhere that impacted everything, but it doesn't absolve them of the part they played as well. It doesn't. So when he was talking about the wide receivers, I think he was silently speaking to the other areas of the team as well. Right? Like, I'm gonna talk about, it's like a head coach talking about his best player in the media, but he's speaking to the entire team. Right? He's talking about this in particular, but that message is to the entire team. I think this is a message to the entire offense. And talking about the wide receivers, like, get these fundamentals down. Because if you're not going to be fundamentally sound in year 2, you're not going to play. We're not settling this year. We had to settle last year in certain positions and certain situations. I don't think Mike Denbrock is up for that moving forward. Settling. I think he's ready to take a step forward in every area of the offense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, consistency and continuity is just such a huge piece to running an effective offense. I think the toughest part about switching your ideology as a team is Notre Dame, I think we can all agree, played their best defense when they had a lead. Edge rushers, D-line can pin their ears back. They're in passing situations. And like we've talked about this entire last hour, the strength of the defense is the secondary. Not that the linebackers suck or the D-line sucks, but when you have Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, and Don Schuler last season, when you have Ben Morrison, Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, Don Schuler, Xavier Watts, Jordan Clark, you're in a good spot. But I think that's what was tough about the rushing offense. You can gain a lead on a Stanford. You can gain a lead on a Miami of Ohio just purely by running the ball. Then your defense can pin their ears back and do what they got to do. You can't do that against Penn State. That's what they learned. You can't do that against Ohio State, and that's what they learned. And so that is the biggest reason for me why the pass game needs to elevate. But, Shaun, one thing that while you were talking about this, I was kind of thinking about, hindsight is always 20/20, that old saying. With that being said, I think the writing was on the wall for a lot of the struggles that Notre Dame's offense had last year. If you can kind of go back and look at some of the things that transpired as the season was going on and even before the season began, you could kind of see it now when you look back. Because when you're in the moment, it's, well, this team is good enough. They have a high enough ceiling that they're going to overcome these things. And to a degree, they did. They played for a national championship despite everything that went on. But look at the offense specifically. You lose your left tackle 1 week into fall camp. You lose your starting center and your starting right guard in week 3. Your starting quarterback didn't participate in spring when you were implementing a new offense with a first-year offensive coordinator. You have a wide receiver room that was made up of transfer portal guys and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison. Your starting tight end was 9 months removed from an ACL tear when he was back on the field playing again. The number 2 tight end in that offense tore his ACL twice in 10 months at the start of his career. Your third option was a redshirt freshman in Cooper Flanagan. So when you paint the picture and you look at it like that, 1, how the heck did this team play for a national championship? And 2, the writing is kind of on the wall. But the reason why we're so high and we're so confident on this team moving forward is because up to this point, knock on wood, they're not experiencing some of these issues. Whoever's going to start for them in the fall has participated all throughout the spring. The young guys that you need to see take that next step are taking that next step. Eli Raridan is now going on what, month 14 of being fully healthy, fully embedded in this offense. Now you have a spoiler riches amongst the offensive line. They returned 5 guys that all started games in 2024. But some of the younger guys that didn't play meaningful snaps are now pushing them to start. That's why there's questions along the offensive line. It's not, well, are they good enough? I think that conversation has been nullified. But they have to go on. They have to take that next step. And you just hope that they do it. But a lot of the things that Mike Denbrock talked about, that's a really good point that you brought up, Shaun, about how I think the message to the wide receiver room encompass the message to the entire offense, because it has to be better and it has to be at a higher level. I just think that the wide receiver room was the vessel that he used to portray what he was speaking to the entire offense. So I think that's a really, really good point.
Do you think there's one group or area in particular that you could say this is a group that could stop them from being good this year?
Gosh. There's some that stick out, but it's not the talent in the room. And let me explain. Quarterback battle. How it's handled, not who, it's the how. Who starts, this is an 11-1 type of team. Whether it's 18, 13, or 8 under center, I think they're an 11-1 team. They're back to the playoffs. Now, separate question for how far they make it in the playoffs, in my opinion, for who starts. It's a different conversation for a different day. But how this quarterback competition is handled, and from what we've heard, it's being handled the right way. Their rotations at practice are being communicated before that practice happens, not afterwards, before. But the quarterback room is going to be one to pay attention to, because we've seen it in the last decade and a half of quarterback competitions not being handled the right way in South Bend, and that can be a very divisive aspect to a football team. Now, I have similar thoughts to the offensive line. How some of these position battles are handled, not necessarily who starts, because you pointed out something great when we talked about the left tackle position. Notre Dame went 14-1 with Anthony Nappis, their starting left tackle. Now, I'm not saying that they won all 14 of those games because of him, but I'm also not saying they lost that one game also because of him. You know what I mean? And so that's how I view it. I don't think it's a talent level thing of who starts and where. It's how they get to their starting five. It's how they get to that starting offensive lineman. It's how they get to that receiver rotation. That's what I'm going to be paying attention to. The only other one for me that I do have some question marks around is the tight end room, because I do think that they're going to play a more vital role in this offense. But that room has the most, from just a player standpoint, the most question marks to me. Eli Raridan has to stay healthy. What's Ty Washington going to do when he gets on campus? Is Jack Larson going to take that next step? Cooper Flanagan's out with an Achilles injury. I'm not expecting him to play any sort of meaningful minutes until maybe the postseason. And that's if he's healthy enough to do it. So the tight end room for me is one that's a question mark. But with how good I believe they're going to be at the quarterback position, I think they're just going to pick up right where they left off from a run game perspective. And what I believe the ceiling to be in the offense or in the wide receiver room, I don't see the tight end being the one position group that we look back to. And it's like, man, Notre Dame just wasn't able to close the deal in the semifinals of the national championship because their tight ends just weren't there. Does that make sense? And so that's where I'm at, Shaun. What say you?
No, we have not spoken. The one thing I think we haven't spoken really about special teams. And for the most part, the special teams unit, even going back to Brian Mason under Marcus Freeman, you could tell Marcus Freeman puts a lot. They started in practice with special teams. So it is a top priority for Marcus Freeman. And they put the work in to be a top special teams unit. I would want to see an elevation in return, whether it's kickoff return or punt return. Of course, we saw the big kickoff return against Georgia. That was huge with Jaden Harrison, but definitely punt return. That's something that I think if you want to talk about, people talk about Notre Dame's offense having handcuffs because of the defensive-minded head coach. I think not wanting to turn the ball over in the return game and not putting more of your gifted and talented returners back there because you have a guy that might be better at just catching the ball, and you'll sacrifice big plays for just getting possession. I understand that. But as you progress, I think in order to be that elite, talented team, you have to have a guy back there that is it going to necessarily mean that they're not going to be a good team? No, but will it cost them possibly in big matchups, I mean, it could be the advantage. I'm sorry, man. Having 25 back there for Lou Holtz was an advantage every week. Every week. They literally went up to the big house and barely did anything offensively. And 25 just twice changed the game. And if you have somebody back there that can change the game, when you're not playing well, it becomes very valuable. And I think what they do, especially when it comes to block punts and different types of things, getting extra possessions, coming up with schemes on fake punts, all of that is fantastic. But the return game and place kicking. Look, man, I don't know what it is. And I talked about this on a pro day because they have had consecutive years and consecutive pro days where the kickers weren't really effective during the regular season. And then all of a sudden they come to pro day and they light it up. And this year was the first time that an inconsistent kicker for Notre Dame didn't go to the pro day and light it up because Mitch Jeter, he did not have a great pro day. And so what is the answer at place kicking? Marcus Freeman has to solve that because it's been a problem early on in his tenure as a head coach. And so place kicking can cost you some games. Place kicking can keep you from being good, in big time moments. So even with the bad game they played against Northern Illinois, place kicking could have won that game if it had been solid. And so other than that, I'm with you, Trevor. I think you hit all the right notes as far as what can cost them. The chat has a great, you wonder about left tackle. That's going back to what you said. How is the left tackle competition? How is it done? Not necessarily who it is. How is that done? Like, does someone have to win that competition and show that they're the best guy? If that's the case, then you feel very comfortable with whomever walks out as the starting left tackle for the first series against Miami. Tight ends, I think injury, like you said, that's just injury and depth. That's what you worry about. But I'm interested because primarily Notre Dame was a 12 personnel team last year, right? That 12 personnel was the majority. That's what they were in the majority of the time. I wonder with the improvement, does it help the health of the tight end room if they become a more balanced with the addition of 11 personnel going up with more usage? Now is only one tight end on the field. And now does that take attrition away from the tight end room and help them to stay a little bit healthier throughout the season? I'm very interested in seeing how that development in the wide receiver room coming on and showing that they can be trusted, how that might help alleviate some of those things that we're talking about with the tight end room.
Mike Denbrock has shown at previous stops that he will format the offense to what the team dictates. Tight ends are always a factor, but the biggest difference that I can look at is when you have what he did at LSU versus what he did at Cincinnati. At Cincinnati, he had two tight ends, and it's hard to keep those guys off the field. So he ran a lot of 12 personnel. At LSU, yeah, sure. I know their first string tight end. His name is escaping me right now. I saw Insured by Big is in the chat. He can probably help me out with this. But I know their tight end is a good, solid tight end, but who are you taking off the field and replacing? You're not taking Brian Thomas off the field. You're not taking Malik Neighbors off the field.
You talk the Taylor kid.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think you could see something a little bit similar for Notre Dame's offense this year. When you have guys like Malachi Fields and Jaden Greathouse and Will Pauling and Jordan Faison, and if Cam Williams can come on, if KK Smith can come on, if Micah Gilbert can come on, a lot of ifs in there, which I'll admit. But if they start to gel as the spring progresses, as the summer gets here and Malachi Fields gets on campus, things like that, who are you taking off the field? And so I think some of that longevity can help where you don't have to have Mitchell Evans and Eli Raritan on the field at the same time. Eli Raritan and Cooper Flanagan on the field at the same time. Mitchell Evans and Cooper Flanagan on the field at the same time. So I think that dynamic could be a little interesting too and help prolong some of the health of the tight ends if Notre Dame is going to play that length of the season that we believe them to play, a 14, 15, 16 game long season. So I think that's a really good point as well. Place kicker is interesting, and that is something that I think could be huge. I think the difference this year is if, let's just say, a Noah Burnett doesn't pan out, and I have no reason to believe that. This is just a hypothetical situation. You have an Eric Schmidt on the roster, one of the best high school kickers in the country. I think that's the caveat. This past season in 2024, I'm willing to give it a mulligan because you have a guy like Mitch Jeter who was hurt for half the year, and kicking is a very psychological game. And so when you have a guy that's inconsistently healthy, he kicked above 90% in the SEC in stadiums like Tuscaloosa, in stadiums like down in the Swamp, at LSU. And then in the second game of the season, I think it's interesting that he was money at Texas A&M. That's SEC country. That's where he just got done kicking. Then his first home opener, he missed 2 field goals. Now, I don't think a lot of that is his fault because the second field goal that got blocked, he was asked to kick like a 62-yard game winner when I think his career long was like 51 before that. So, like, I'm not putting that on the kid. But then you go from missing 2 field goals in the home opener and an ugly upset loss to then you get hurt. And so I'm willing to look at it with a little bit of a mulligan there. But this year's going to be telling. Is place kicking at Notre Dame just going to be inconsistent? Because Spencer Schrader, he could make a field goal from Mishawaka. Don't know if it's going to be straight. You know, look, that's just what it was. Now, if Spencer Schrader was on the field against Northern Illinois to try to kick a 62-yard game winner, I might actually feel a little bit better about that. Just because he has the length to get it there. We'll see if it's in between the yellow uprights, but that was some of the issue. And so I think that's place kicking is another interesting one. Special teams return game. I'm more focused on punt returns because kick returns, there's only so much you can do. Teams just did not kick to Jaden Harrison. And when they did, Georgia found out the hard way as to why teams stayed away from him all season long. Punt returning, I'm absolutely with you. Yes, it's one thing to not turn the ball over, but if opponents' net punt average can start going from that, 45-yard range down to that like 38-yard range and start moving the ball a little bit closer, help out the offense a little bit, I think that could be huge. I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you on that one. Well, all right, folks, that's going to do it for the team portion of the RTCF show today. Really good topics of conversation here today. Next, we're going to jump into grand scheme of college football, and we have another really fun topic coming up here. But before we get there, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button. There's 270 people watching live right now. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know whenever Irish Breakdown goes live. Be sure to, not be sure to, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on whatever platform that you guys watch this on, whether it's Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Shaun, the last thing that we are going to talk about today is college football as a whole. And what we're going to talk about today are what are some of the surprise teams or sleeper teams in 2025 that could make some noise. I don't know if there's going to be an Indiana from 2024. Now, I don't know how you took this as, but I looked at it both ways. When I took surprise teams, I thought of teams that could play above what some people are expecting. And I also looked at it some teams that have the opportunity to dip a little bit below of what some of the expectations were. So I looked at it twofold because for every IU that there was last season, you had IU, you had Arizona State, you also had Florida State, you also had Oklahoma State, Now, I don't think anybody was talking about Oklahoma State being a playoff contender, but they competed for the Big 12 championship in 2023, and last season they finished the year 3-9. And so I looked at it both ways, but I'll kick it over to you first. Do you have, or I know you do, but what are some of the teams that you have on your list for surprise teams in this upcoming season?
So by surprise, I think I put this in a category of teams that are coming off of disappointing seasons that people might have forgotten about, that people might say, that these teams might say, hey, don't trip. This isn't a trend. We just had a blip on the radar. And so in saying that, I like a lot of what Florida State did, especially in the portal, especially at the skill positions. Their recruiting class for the last 2 years in the defensive backfield has been absolutely superb. And they made some coaching changes that I feel like were necessary. And so kudos to that. Do I fully trust them to be a surprise team that makes it into the college football playoff? I think it's going to be difficult in that ACC with Louisville, what I expect from them, what I expect from Clemson, and what I expect for SMU. I think it's difficult. So I think they had a chance, but I'm not sure. Colorado could be seen as a surprise. I think they were seen as a surprise last year. So if they make it to the playoff, I think that would be definitely surprising. But I'm going to go with the team. Arizona State was a huge surprise last year for a lot of people. I don't know if they can be considered as a surprise. But I'm going to go to Cal Whittingham and Utah as a team that a lot of people have forgotten about. And they finally got off of the bus of their quarterback that was there for like a decade. You know what I'm saying? But I think Cal Whittingham, and if you go look at that BYU-Utah game, BYU was lucky to escape that game with a victory. Utah played them very tough, and they literally had no quarterback play at all. And I think this year, Cal Whittingham and Utah, they could be a team that could be on the verge or right there on the fringe of winning the Big 12 and then getting a berth in the playoffs. So I would say them. I'm going to go to another team that I think for a lot of reasons have been left for dead, and I just don't know why. I think Michigan could be a very scary team in the Big Ten. I really do. Everybody's talking about Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana. Hey, who beat Ohio State in the Big Ten last year? Outside of Oregon, Michigan. Who played Oregon tough for 2.5 quarters at the Big House? Michigan. And who had a chance to beat Indiana on the road? Michigan. Let me tell you something. They returned some really good defensive linemen. They lost 2 behemoths to the NFL draft, but they returned some talent, and they returned some talent at linebacker. That's one thing they developed. I think their offensive line that struggled mightily early, I think they're going to be more consistent and better. They get Justice Haynes as a running back. They're going to have a little bit of, thunder and lightning in the backfield now. And then you talk about quarterback play. Will it be the true freshman that they turn to? Right? Will it be the youngster that they allowed to sit and marinate as a redshirt freshman? But I expect that similarly to Notre Dame, they're going to have better passers at the quarterback position, but they're going to be inexperienced. And I do believe in their head coach as a play caller. I have to wait and see how he grows as a head coach and a leader of a program. But specifically as calling plays and creating offense, I do believe in him as a play caller. Can we consider LSU a sleeper? I think a lot of people are out on LSU. I understand why a lot of people are out on LSU. LSU absolutely can make a run at the playoffs. And I think a lot of people have kind of like sold their LSU stock, with what Brian Kelly has done. I think he's underwhelmed. I think that's safe to say. He's underwhelmed early on at LSU, but they're a team to look out for as well. Another team I was thinking about when I was playing this out, it's very easy for me, to take my fandom and say Illinois. But Illinois is who they are. They don't have a quarterback that's going to get them over the hump. Can they steal a game against Indiana? Yeah, they had a good shot that they could steal a game against Indiana. Do I see them beating the Oregon when they face off? Nah, I don't think they're ready for that. And I think Brett beat them, so I wouldn't put them as a surprise team, even though that's my squad. And then I'll finish it off with, I'm going to be honest, I'm very intrigued by Clark Lee and whether or not if Clark Lee can get Vanderbilt to 9 to 10 wins, you might as well act like they won the World Series. Like a Vanderbilt team that won 9 to 10 games, man, that's absolutely amazing, right? So that's a sleeper team for me to watch in the SEC, not from the sense of they're making the playoffs, but 9 to 10 wins at Vanderbilt is like a playoff berth for a lot of other top elite schools. So those are the teams that jumped out to me as far as surprise teams in 2025. Like you said, I don't know if we're going to have an Indiana that comes from being the absolute bottom feeder of their conference, and then they're automatically in the college football playoff. Nah, I don't know if I see that. I don't know if I see that.
My prediction for next season, I think you're going to find a little bit of the in-between. I don't think you're going to have a team like a Florida State that last year went 13-1, or in 2023 went 13-1, and then they go 2-10. I also think you're going to have a team like an IU that's perennially, a 5-6 win program to make in the playoffs. I don't know if you'll see it to those extremes, but I think you will see some variance. I'll start with Michigan because you and I both have those on our list. And as much as it pains me to say as a Notre Dame fan, but Michigan is a team that I have my eye on for a handful of different reasons. First, I find it extremely hard to believe that their quarterback situation is going to be worse than what it was in 2024. Whether it's Mikey Keene from Fresno State or they go with Bryce Underwood, the exciting new incoming freshman. I think that's going to be better. You touched on Justice Haynes. I think that's a phenomenal pickup. Because if there's one thing that I believe that Michigan will always just be able to do is it's run the football at a high level, and getting a guy like Justice Haynes, I think was a really good pickup. They're getting some defensive players back on top of the players that you mentioned. They're getting some players back in their secondary that they lost from injury last year early in the season. And then another guy too is, look, man, I still have some questions about Sharon Moore. I do. But he went 8-5 his first full season as a head coach, and they ended their year beating Ohio State and Columbus, and Alabama in a bowl game, and in a bowl game that Jalen Milroe played in. I think that's something to note. And they did both of that without Colston Loveland and Will Johnson at corner, arguably the two best players on their team outside of Mason Graham. And so to me, I think that speaks volumes. I pay a lot of attention to how a team ends their season. That's kind of a common theme that I have going on with this list that I have put together. Another team that I have ranked on here, again, I don't know if you call them a sleeper, but here's why I put them on my list. I think Indiana is a team that you're going to have to keep an eye on again this season. Now, I know it's tough to say that like a playoff team from this last year is a sleeper team for 25, but there are a lot of people that believe they just caught lightning in a bottle and it was just one of those fluke seasons that nobody was expecting anything from them. And that could be true, but they return a lot of key pieces. And I like some of their portal pickups. They bring back Elijah Surratt. They bring back Omar Cooper. They bring back Mikhail Kamara, Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Amari Farrell. And these are all players that have experience in big moments. Those are all players that played in the Horseshoe in Columbus and played against Notre Dame at night in Notre Dame Stadium in the first round of the playoffs. And so to me, I think that's going to be huge. I really do. Now, unlike last season, we're going to know relatively quickly the level of competition that IU is going to face. Because let's be real about something here. The level of competition that they faced up until what? When they played Ohio State was just not good. In my opinion, it just wasn't. Michigan, I'll hear out arguments for them, but at the time, I think Michigan was, 5-4 going into that game against IU. Yes, they played Nebraska and absolutely decimated them. Nebraska was not a team that impressed me. There was a reason why that team was 4-1 going into that matchup, and they were unranked. That's how I look at it. And then outside of that, they played a bunch of nobodies. Now, you go through and you start looking at who they have on their schedule this year. And they play Illinois, they play at Iowa, they play at Oregon, they play at Penn State, and they host Wisconsin. So we're not going to have to wait long to see if Curt Cignetti going into year 2 is going to be, okay, like, is this just kind of a standard for IU now? Are they going to be a perennial 9-10 win team every year? Or was last year a little bit of a fluke? They had some momentum with the new head coach, and they had a group of 5 all-star team that came in, and they were able to knock off some big names, but not necessarily good quality teams. Because when they did play those good quality teams, they lost, and they lost convincingly. That game against Ohio State, in my opinion, was never close. I know the final score of the Notre Dame game was 27-17. Look, IU, to make it a 10-point loss, had to score a touchdown, recover an onside kick, score a touchdown, and get a 2-point conversion to then still lose by 10 points. That game was not close. Just wasn't. I'm sorry for any resident IU people that might be in the chat today. But can they repeat that performance? Do I think that IU is going to go and compete for the Big Ten championship? No, I don't. Not when you have a conference with Penn State that returns a lot of key pieces. Ohio State's coming off of a national championship win. Oregon just won the Big Ten a year ago. And we just talked about how Michigan could be a big sleeper team. Michigan is a team that I believe could potentially, if things break out the way that they are, heading into the month of November, I think people will talk about them as a contender to play for the Big Ten championship. I don't know if they will. I don't know if they're going to win it, but I think that they could. Another team on this list for me that I have is Kansas, coming out of the Big 12. And they're an intriguing team to me. They returned Jalen Daniels. Their skilled positions were built through the portal, and I always will have question marks about that. I'm high on LSU this year because I like their receiver talent. A lot of it was through the portal, though, so I don't know how that's going to look. Now, it's not all completely built through the portal. It's similar to how Notre Dame's was. Yes, Notre Dame went to the portal last season to get Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison, but they also had Jaden Greathouse. They also had Jordan Faison, and I look at LSU similarly. Now, 3 out of Kansas's 4 final games were all upset wins to end the year. In consecutive weeks, they beat a ranked Iowa State team, a ranked BYU team, and a ranked Colorado team. I think that's huge. I think it's going to come down to how Jalen Daniels performs and if he can remain healthy throughout an entire season. But I like Lance Leopold and what he was able to do to finish Kansas's season. Because Kansas was a team that I had my eye on going into last season, and the expectation, they didn't meet them. But I am interested to see how they do this year. And like we've talked about, Shaun, I know you and Brian have talked about it. Brian and I have talked about it. You and I have talked about it. The Big 12 right now is the Wild West. Any team could come out of that league, and if you told me that they're playing for the Big 12 championship, I'd believe you. Honestly, I would. If you told me that it's going to be Kansas and Arizona State, I'd believe you. So it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be interesting. The last team that I have on this list as far as like surprise teams on the positive end is Florida. I think they get lost a little bit in the mix when talking about SEC teams because there's a question about, will Georgia be able to make its way back to its dominance? As far as I'm concerned, until they're dethroned from winning the SEC championship, they're still the team that you have to go through. Honestly, if I'm just being real about it. But that's a me personally. But can Georgia return to that big-time national prowess, make a run in the playoffs like they were a couple years ago? Can Alabama return to that? You know, is Texas going to be able to finally get over that hump and beat that big name team down in the SEC and make a run in the playoffs with Arch Manning? I think those are a lot of the headlines that get taken away in the SEC. But to me, I'm keeping my eye on Florida. I like what they are with DJ Lagway. Their schedule last year was brutal, and they were able to make it out 4-4 in the SEC and 8-5 overall. Last year on their schedule, they had to play Miami out of conference, Texas A&M, at Tennessee, at Georgia, at Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss. And even with that schedule, they ended the season with 3 straight wins over LSU at home, a ranked Ole Miss at home, and FSU on the road. Now, we all know what Florida State turned out to be, but them being able to overcome that schedule and still go down into an environment like Tallahassee and come away with a win, I think that's impressive. I'm going to be interested to see what kind of step DJ Lagway takes going into year 2 as a starter. But for me, I think Florida is another team that you have to keep an eye on. And I view them similar to the conversation of what I had with IU. I don't think Florida is going to be competing for an SEC championship. I don't. But they are going to be that team for me that you kind of have to keep an eye on. You know, if you are, I don't know what their schedule is for this upcoming season, but if you are one of the teams on their schedule, they're not one of the ones that you can just go and sit and sleep through, because it's going to be a battle. I mean, gosh, good Lord. Yeah, this year they play at LSU and they play at Miami in back-to-back weeks without a bye, and that's before the month of September is even over. Then they get a bye week. Then they host Texas A&M. Then they're at Kyle Field the next week. And then they play Mississippi State at home. And then they play Georgia on a neutral field. Then they're at Ole Miss a couple weeks after that. Then they host Tennessee the next week after that. So Florida's schedule this season doesn't get any easier. But I think with a more experienced roster, I like some of the transfer portal pickups that they got. They're another team to keep an eye on for me. That's for sure.
And I think a lot of this is driven by the quarterback situation, especially in the portal. When you start talking about surprise teams, I'm going to give you 3 teams that I thought about. I did give thought to Florida with DJ Lagway, right? But it just concerns me now. He had the leg injury. Now he's dealing with a shoulder. But these were teams that I thought about. I thought about, and someone said in the chat, I thought about Aiden Childs in Michigan State in the Big Ten, right? But I just thought about the difficulty and the climb of the teams and programs that they would have to get over. I don't know what that schedule looks like. I'll be very interested once I do give a look at it. John Mateer at Oklahoma was a team that I thought about. But once again, in the SEC with that schedule, really how much of a difference can he make, you know, to make them a surprise team? I also thought about a team we talked about. You get the Gronkowski kid at quarterback at Iowa, right? Are they a surprise team? Which, honestly, I probably should have given more thought to that, because Kirk Ferentz has been able to do it without quarterback play and be competitive. And I don't know, he must have like some pictures of the schedule makers in the Big Ten, because he always ends up getting like a schedule that he doesn't have to play 2 of the big 3. And they only have 1 major game in the regular season that puts them in the Big Ten championship or puts them in the running for the Big Ten championship. Then who else? South Carolina, I guess. I don't fully buy the Sellers kid at quarterback. I think that's what holds me back from considering them as a true contender to be a sleeper team. Oh, Baylor. We talked about Baylor as a team to look at, right? I was very impressed with their young quarterback. Damon Williams out at Washington. You know, that's a team to watch. But once again, just the Big Ten is extremely, extremely tough, man. It's extremely tough. And then last but not least, what do you think about Georgia Tech and Haynes King as a sleeper team? That's a team I thought about as well, but I just didn't commit to them being one of my teams to watch.
They lost a little bit too much on defense for me.
Yeah.
Because with all those defensive pieces and Haynes King, and Jamal Haynes last year, they still went 7-6. Now, their schedule was pretty tough. I won't lie.
Yeah.
But they were one of the teams that I did consider. I considered Georgia Tech. Having Haynes King and Jamal Haynes back is interesting to me. I think Eric Singleton is still back there as well. I think.
Yes, you're right.
And so that is interesting to me. But defensively, they lost quite a bit. I think they return on their D-line. I think their only returning starters that Vanderberg kid. I think he comes back on their D-line. But I know they lost Zeke Biggers. There's going to be some people that I'm interested to see how they replace them. And so they're a team that I thought about. There's a couple that I did. I thought about putting USC in there. But
we're too petty to do that.
I know. We're honestly
too petty to do that right now. Let's be honest.
Oh, I know. And honestly, one of the reasons why I'm not putting them in there is I think that they're going to have a decent start to the season. They're going to go to South Bend and get worked, and then the rest of their season is going to be bad like it was in 2023. That is an honest assessment. But I do like some of the pieces that they have coming back. Jade Maeva intrigues me. In the sample size that we got to see him, he looked great against Notre Dame and didn't look the same in the bowl game. So I don't know what that's going to be like. But they bring back a couple of good receivers. I like Mekhi Lemon. I like Jacoby Lane. Those are interesting to me. I think their running back situation is going to take a step back from where it was last year. But I did think about USC. I saw somebody else put in the chat about Nebraska, and I so badly want Nebraska to be in this conversation. But every single year I do the same thing of like, hey, Nebraska could be a team to look out for, and then they end the year with 7 wins. Nebraska is very much a team to me that I have to see them do it. You know, which to be fair, kind of the definition of a sleeper team is a team that you don't think that could. But I think they have the pieces to. I think that their quarterback is interesting. If he can grow and mature and continue to develop his game, I think he could be pretty good. Some of it for me is like, I think you need a specific type of head coach at Nebraska, and I don't know if Matt Rule's the guy. I don't. And so they're going to be interesting for me. But you know what? I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens with them. And then I have some sleeper teams. I don't know if they're I don't know if I would label them as sleepers, but a lot of people are labeling them as they're just going to be good. And I don't think they're going to be as good as what some people think. I think Miami's at the top of that list for me. I like Cam Ward a lot more than I like Carson Beck. And Cam Ward was left out of the playoffs and the ACC championship. And that's when they had guys like Xavier Restrepo and a good running back. And so I'm going to be interested to see what Carson Beck does with that. But I think there's a lot of people talking about how Miami could be a runaway favorite in the ACC. To that, I would say don't forget about Clemson. You know,
I mean, they just won the championship. That's not Clemson wouldn't be a surprise to me. It would be a surprise because I think they are. You know what? It goes back to what he said on the field after they beat Notre Dame. Like if I would invest in Clemson stock, and that stock continues to ascend and go up, you know. So it wouldn't be a surprise to me. Dabo's done it before, and I think he's, you know, realized the things that he's had to change. And, you know, his quarterback has gotten better, and he has definitely improved the talent and the blueprint for wide receivers that are needed moving forward. More explosive wide receivers, great run out the catch, something that Notre Dame's trying to do. He's done that in the span of like 2 years. He's made moves, and I guess if you look at it, for them jumping into that tier 1, I guess they could be a surprise team if they make that jump. You know, Isaac Brown and Miller Moss and Jeff Brom and what they have as weapons coming back at wide receiver. Could they be a sleeper team at Louisville? Could you consider Louisville a sleeper team? You know, if they take a step forward, get into the playoffs.
Louisville's an interesting one. Yeah,
it's possible.
Louisville's interesting. One thing real quick, too. I was wrong about Georgia Tech. The Singleton kid's gone. Malik Rutherford is the receiver that they return. Okay. Singleton transferred to Auburn. So, yeah, I caught that in the chat. So, My bad on that one. But yeah, my thing with Louisville, I don't know how much I trust Miller Moss. If there's one thing that I will give Lincoln Riley credit for, is that guy can develop quarterbacks. I think his track record speaks for himself. And Miller Moss was a quarterback that he moved away from. It's not that I don't trust Jeff Brom, because I also think that he's a great offensive-minded coach. But I do think that they are taking a step back going from Tyler Shuck to Miller Moss. That's just me. I think Miller Moss is more of a big name than what Tyler Shuck might have been, if I'm being honest with you. But that's just me. I don't know how much I trust Miller Moss, but they do return a lot. I love their running back room as a whole, led by Isaac Brown. I think they return Colin Lacey and Chris Bell in the receiving core. I think the only person they lost was Ja'Cory Brooks. I don't want to just say like, oh, it's just Ja'Cory Brooks, but it's not like they have a depleted wide receiver core.
Yeah.
For me, it's all going to come down to how Miller Moss can do. And I don't love Ron English as their defensive coordinator. So, but I did think about Louisville for a second. I did think about them.
Ron English comes across as a very, at times, undisciplined as a defense coordinator, right? When he's in his bag, he's in his bag. But when you get him, you know, they have a tendency to give up some big plays and give up some points.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so that is, I understand why you feel the way about. Speaking of Ron English, his previous, someone he was connected to, North Carolina State, and their young quarterback, who I thought come in and to do what he did. I like North Carolina State to possibly be a sleeper team, not to necessarily to give some teams headaches, to really give some teams headaches. In the ACC. You know, I don't know if I trust. I don't know if I trust their overall depth and talent, but it'd be interesting. And like all of this is tied into the quarterback, man. When you start talking about surprises, CJ Bailey is definitely a reason for Wolfpack fans to feel upbeat about what they can do. They can do. I don't know if they have the defense and the talent on defense that they had 2 years ago when Notre Dame went up there and beat them. You're talking about Peyton Wilson and like the guys they had in that defensive front.
Oh, yeah.
In the secondary wasn't on the same level. But yeah, offensively, I think they have a chance to give some teams. Because I remember, I think it was Clemson. They went to Clemson, and early on in that game, you know, they were actually moving the ball with CJ Bailey. And then all of a sudden, Clemson just hit them with some big plays, got a turnover here or there. And then you know how a game can literally just turn like that.
Yeah.
And the team isn't experienced enough to really recover. But the kid competed. So he's intriguing. He's definitely intriguing. I don't really buy into them being one of those teams, but you know, it will be interesting to watch, as well will Duke, you know, with their new quarterback, you know, and
No, those are so going back down to the group of five level. One team that I'm going to keep my eye on is Navy. Honestly, they returned Blake Horvath, Eli Heidenreich, Alex Teska. They could have an Army-esque type of season, because I mean Navy got derailed. Their season kind of did a little bit after they lost. After Blake Horvath got a little banged up, and that offense just turned a little differently, you know. But I mean, there's still a reason why they went and they played that Army team and beat them pretty convincingly, if I remember. And so I think they could be a group of five sleeper team for me, honestly. And then, of course, it is us also just because they're on Notre Dame's schedule. I know Boise State lost Aston Genty, but I think that like they're still going to be an interesting team for me. Maddox Madsen, I put a lot of weight into teams returning a quarterback with playoff experience. Mm-hmm. What do you think about SMU? Where do you think that they're going to fall this season? Because they lost a little bit on defense, but they do return Kevin Jennings. You know, I don't know how to. They're the one team that I don't know how to gauge.
Well, I think they lost a lot, but then they have a lot. We talked about Kevin Jennings last year, right? I'm interested in. I put him in my top 5 returners at quarterback because I'm interested in what he learned from that playoff experience against Penn State. Like, that's valuable. That's valuable. You know, my dad told me, man, you make mistakes, you learn more from your mistakes than you will from your triumphs. And so we'll see what this young man is made of. First of all, he had to win the position. Early in the year, it was a battle. And he had to win the position. He wins the position. He takes on the team. He leads them to the ACC championship game. He leads them to college football playoffs. And he has one of his worst games ever at Penn State. What does he learn from that? Who does he become? Because what you did lose, if he elevates his play, he can cover up and bring everybody else with him, because that's what you do at the quarterback position. So I'm interested in seeing if he can do that. And it would be a surprise if they follow their success up with another berth in the playoffs. I think that would be a surprise if they become a playoff team 2 years in a row. But I think it would also set a trend like, yo, SMU might be here for the foreseeable future. I think Kevin Jennings has a chance to get better. I don't know if he's going to become elite. Do I think he's going to regress? No, I don't think he's going to regress. You know, I think they still have talent, and I know they brought in talent at the skill positions in the recruiting class. So offensively, they should be good to go. I'm more worried about what they lost defensively.
Yep, me too.
That's what I'm more worried about. What they lost defensively and whether or not they're going to be able to replace those guys. And you know somebody else I'm thinking about? Look, man, I wanted the Concepcion kid the first time I saw him play against Notre Dame a couple of years ago. I was like, oh, can we get that kid? And for Texas A&M to get him and to bring back Marcel Reed and move on from Connor Wegman. Now, you know, it's a lot of people. Marcel Reed is one of those great conversation pieces at quarterback, because either you believe in him or you don't. Like, either you don't think he's any good or you see some talent and say, okay, let's see what he can do, right? He came in, took over, and he was the guy that was leading the way when they were making their run and led the SEC going into that last quarter of the season. And unfortunately, teams figured him out, figured the offense out, and were able to shut the Texas A&M situation down offensively. But let's be fair, his offensive line really wasn't that good. Their running backs were thin, and we know what their wide receiving core was last year. Wasn't that good. And they were just a little bit better than the Penn State group, maybe. So, and then they did lose one of their best wide receivers though in the portal. I think he went to Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. So, could Texas A&M be a surprise team if they get to the playoff? Maybe.
Texas A&M is a team I'm going to keep my eye on. I do like their portal receiver class. I mean, they got that Micah Hudson kid. I don't really know what happened with him, but he was like Texas Tech's like first 5-star recruit in like school history, and then he never played. You know, but I like the Concepcion pickup. They returned Terry Bussey. I think that one could be interesting. But to me, they return all 5 starters along the offensive line. And then they bring back – look, if Colin Klein can figure out – and honestly, he should probably watch some film of what Notre Dame did last year on offense. But if he can figure out how to get Marcel Reed, Le'Veon Moss, and Amari Daniels all kind of gelling as a running game, I don't know if they have to throw the ball all over the yard to win. You know, I don't know how many 48-10 wins Texas A&M is going to have. You know what I mean? I don't really know what their schedule is. I'll pull that up right now. But to me, they're an interesting team. My biggest question for them is, how do you replace everything that you lost along the defensive line? That one's going to be huge. They lost Nick Scourton and then 2 of their interior defensive linemen. Yeah, they lost. Yeah, they lost Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, Nick Scourton. That's huge. Like that was kind of the heart and soul of their defense. But it is interesting what they do bring back on the back end. You know, Will Lee's coming back. That one's a little bit interesting. Scooby Williams is coming back. Torian York is coming back. And so, they have some pieces to work with that I think could be interesting. But, I mean, next year you go and you look at their schedule. They're obviously at Notre Dame in September. Then they have a bye week. And then in order, they host Auburn. They host Mississippi State. They host Florida. Then they play at Arkansas, and then they're at LSU, and then until their next bye. Then they're at Missouri, home against South Carolina. And then like the SEC does, they have kind of I call it their third bye week, but then they play Samford the second to last week of the season, and then they finish up the year at Texas. So I think it could be interesting. Also, Mike Elko going into year 2 is huge. Yeah. And so I'm going to be interested to see what Texas A&M does for sure. Yeah, that's for sure.
I think Mike Elko can recruit.
Yeah,
especially down there in Texas. So they'll get some big boys, But like you said, Scourton, Turner, you lose a lot on that defensive line. Mm-hmm. A lot. A defensive line, by the way, that when the rubber met the road in the fourth quarter there, Notre Dame kind of dominated them. I'm just saying. Just like to point that out. To point that out.
Yep. Just in case people forgot.
Yeah.
Yep. Just in case people forgot, Anthony Knapp kind of held his own a little bit in the run game against Nick Scourton too, I will say. Pass game, different
Not
conversation.
So much.
Different ball. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Definitely going to be interesting. The last thing that we're going to talk about today, Shaun, is we're going to talk about the college football playoff, more specifically the future of the college football playoff. Moving forward, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the makeup of the college football playoff semifinals is going to be. And one of the things that kind of sparked this conversation is when you look at the March Madness tournament, the Final Four are all number 1 seeds. So it kind of begs the question, are we going to see that in the future of the college football playoffs? Where now, obviously, there's not multiple number 1 seeds, but is there a scenario that the Final Four teams are seeds 1, 2, 3, and 4? And essentially make it look like what the 14 playoff format was. I have some thoughts about it. Shaun, I'll kick it over to you first. What do you say?
The chances of what we've seen this year, by the way, the last time it happened was 2008, bodes well for me as a Bulls fan because the best player in that tournament ended up being the number 1 overall pick coming to the Chicago Bulls. And I want a little bit of that pixie dust coming down on the Bulls, and we can get Cooper Flag. But I digress. One can hope. I think going chalk is actually, what's very interesting? Big picture, I look at this as the powers that be using NIL as a behind closed doors vehicle to get things to where they really want it to be. This is what you want if you're a Power 4 big time program in college basketball. You want the Sweet 16 and all the revenue to go to the big time conferences. You want the Big 4 conferences to be comprised the 16 teams in the Sweet 16. That's absolutely what you want. And the reason it went that way is because of NIL, right? So as much as you complain about NIL, NCAA, it's really guiding everything in the direction of what you want. So when we talk about these surprise teams, think it not strange that most of the surprise teams we talked about came from the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC. Like, this is what the NCAA and the powers that be, this is what they really want. They really want the bulk of the 12 teams in the college football playoffs to come from Power 4 conferences. That's what they want. They don't want the Cinderella story. They have no need for the Cinderella story. They want the revenue, and they want to cut out the middleman in a sense, right? So now The Indiana story, it's a great story, but do they really want that story? Or would they rather Michigan be the team that replaces Indiana in the college football playoff? So, but pointing to what you said in pre-show, Trevor, basketball is a little bit different than football. A lot, you can make more of an impact in NIL with one addition or two additions than you can say in football, right? And so when we start the conversation about football, I think the chances are more slim that you'll get chalked in the college football playoff, whereas 1, 2, 3, and 4 facing off in the semifinals. Will it ever happen? I think it will happen in the future, but the chances of it happening are far less than when we're talking about college basketball. Last year, and then, like you said, if they don't change the makeup of how those top four seeds are given out, now if they change the top four seeds to like the best 4 teams, now the chances increase, but as currently constructed, it's going to be very slim chances that happens moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you and I talked about this when we were getting ready and gearing up to start the show. And in its current format, I'm going to say no. Because you have to look at what the automatic bids mean. And you start looking at, odds are one of, obviously, we can all already chalk in the winner of the Big Ten, the winner of the SEC, they're going to be 1 and 2 every year. Like, I think that's a safe assumption to make. Every single year during the 12-team format, the winner of the Big Ten and the winner of the SEC will split seeds 1 and 2. And then you start talking about, okay, will the winner of the ACC or the winner of the Big 12 or, like we saw this past year, the group of 5 automatic bid get the bye? I think in that format, I don't think you're ever going to see a 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't like to live in the world of absolutes. But in my mind, especially this past season, taking what we know of a 12-team playoff format, because we only have 1 year of a sample size to go off of, I think the third best team in the Big Ten, and I'm talking, when I mean third best team in the Big Ten, I'm talking like per the conference rankings. Like, I think Ohio State was the third best team in the Big Ten, but like, I don't think that they were the third best team in the Big Ten. They won the national championship and absolutely slaughtered the Big Ten champions in the Rose Bowl. But with that being said, I think that a Notre Dame, a third place team in the Big Ten, a second place team in the Big Ten, a second place team in the SEC is just going to be better than who the Big 12 or the group of 5 automatic bid is going to be if they are elected to get the bye. And so that's how it is for me. And I believe that for a couple of reasons. One, you talked about the difference in like basketball and football. And yeah, like you could get one player in basketball and that changes the landscape of your whole team. Prime example, look at Davidson when they had Steph Curry. They don't have Steph Curry. They're not making a run to the Elite Eight. They might not make the tournament. Who knows? But they had Steph Curry, and we all know what happened. Football is a completely different game, and I think the difference lies in the trenches. Deion Sanders talked about how when he was at Jackson State, he got asked in an interview once, like, hey, man, like, why don't you move up a level? Like, you're dominating everybody down here. And he said, well, because our skilled positions are not a key indicator of our ability to compete at the FBS level. It's the trenches. That's the biggest difference, offensive and defensive line. And that is carried over to his story at Colorado. What can Colorado not do? Run the football and stop the run. There was no question mark if Shedeur Sanders could tear up a secondary. There's no question if Travis Hunter was a good lockdown corner. I don't think there was any question about that. I did have questions if they would stop a team from rushing for 175 yards a game. I did have questions of if Colorado could have a 100-yard rusher. What was the biggest difference when you watched an IU play a team like a Rutgers or a Maryland, and then when they went and played Ohio State and Notre Dame? The difference was in the trenches because IU wasn't able to run the ball effectively like they could. IU had a really good rush defense, but again, I had a lot of stories, and we talked about it a lot when the playoff game was happening. I believe that a lot of those stats for their rush defense were padded a little bit by some of the level of opponents that they played. Me personally, but you can go back and look at the numbers, and it kind of backs that up. So that is why I'm a firm believer that I don't believe that in the current state of the playoffs, it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed. I could see it some years being like a 1, 2, and 3. This upcoming year could be a good indicator of that. I'm really high on Clemson this season. So you could have a scenario where, the Big Ten winner is like a Penn State who has a lot of returning pieces, or it's an Ohio State coming off of a national championship win, or Oregon repeats. You have an SEC winner. Maybe it's Georgia again. Maybe Alabama returns to that stage. Maybe it's Texas. Maybe Texas finally gets that win. So you're looking at a scenario where the 1 and 2 seed is one of those, and the 3rd seed could be Clemson with all the experience that they have coming back. I could see it then maybe the semifinals is 1, 2, and 3. But again, I don't see one of the Big 12 champion or the Group of 5 champion knocking off a Notre Dame, the Big 10 runner-up, or the SEC runner-up. I don't see that happening. Now, once they move to the 16-team format, depending on how they do the seeding, and once they get to, okay, because this year it was weird, like your ranking was not your seed because of what happens in the conference championship and all that other stuff. But I do think it's going to be interesting if once they get to 16 teams, if it's just going to be, hey, if you're ranked number 1 in the final playoff rankings, you're the number 1 seed. Now, stuff's going to have to happen with the conference championships. And in the direction that they're heading, I don't know if that's going to be a thing in the next 3 to 5 years. Who knows? But I could see a scenario like that where if your true ranking is your seed, I could see that being a lot more of a thing. But up until that point, for those reasons, I don't see in a true 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, honestly, Trev, the simple answer is Notre Dame can't get a top 4 seed, so it'll never be 1, 2, 3, 4 because we're always going to be in the Final Four. It's as simple as that.
Look, man,
that's as simple as that. Homer hypothesis. That's what I think about it. Notre Dame is always going to be in the top 4, so in the semifinals. So therefore, by default, we can't get a top 4 seed, so it will never be scratch or never be chalk when it comes to college football.
I mean, look, man, until proved differently, like I said, it's a 1-year sample size, but
it is.
Notre Dame, with the trajectory of the program that they're on, I think that they're always going to be in that mix. But then again, like the same could be said for whoever the 2nd and 3rd place teams are in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, would it surprise you? Like, let's just play out this hypothetical scenario. Would it surprise you?
Go ahead. I'm glad you said that. Go ahead.
Yeah, like, would it surprise you at all if, like, let's say in the current ranking system and how teams are seeded now, would it surprise you if once again, let's say Ohio State and Penn State play in the Big Ten championship this year, and Penn State loses again to Ohio State. And then Penn State goes and they play the winner of the Big 12 and they play BYU in the quarterfinals. Would it surprise you at all that Penn State wins that game?
Not at all.
It's the same could be said about the SEC. Like, let's just say Texas plays Alabama and Steve Sarkisian can't get it done again. And Texas is playing, in the quarterfinals, they're playing, I'm trying to think of the Group of 5 that could get an automatic bye. Like, let's just say, just because we're having fun here, let's say it's Navy. Let's say Texas goes and plays Navy because Navy got the Group of 5 automatic bid, and for whatever reason, the Big 12 champion was ranked below them in the standings. Would it surprise you in the slightest that Texas beats Navy in the quarterfinals? Like, that's how I view it.
No.
And to me, I think it rests on the shoulders of, at least this upcoming season, the Big 12 and the Group of 5. Because we've said before, one of the reasons why the Big 12 is so fun to watch is they're playing on an even playing field. But that playing field isn't on the same level as the top tier teams in the SEC and the Big 10. And so that to me is the biggest differentiator, Shaun. That's what it is for me.
Yeah, I think you were spot on with that, and I think eventually, they'll learn. I think not having the 4 seeds pretty much lose before you get to the semifinals kind of spark the conversation to pick up concerning expanding to 16, right? Because at the end of the day, they want the big boys in the semifinals, right? And the truth of the matter, they had Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame. I mean, you can't. Who would you take out? Out of those 4, who would you take out that make it bigger? Maybe throw a Georgia in there. Maybe. Selfishly add another SEC team. But yeah, we saw Georgia Notre Dame play the round before in the quarters. So look, I don't foresee it happening, like you said. I just don't. Would it be super dope? Maybe. But I think having games like Arizona State taking Texas to the brink of disaster, that would have been a disastrous loss for Sark and Texas if they'd allowed Arizona State to complete the comeback and win that game. I don't think it was disastrous for Georgia to lose to Notre Dame. I think it made everything more intriguing, right? Because Notre Dame is that team, either you love them or hate them. And that drives up revenue, that drives up eyes, because everybody's going to come to see. It's like Floyd Mayweather. Everybody's going to come to see what happens, regardless of what you think about him. We want to see him win. We want to see him lose. And we're all watching the same thing. That's Notre Dame.
Oh, 100%.
That is Notre Dame.
100%. I mean, why did Alabama pull crazy numbers from like 2012 to like 2020?
Same thing.
Like I watched almost all of Alabama's big games, and I'm not a roll tide roll guy. I just wanted to watch them lose. That's why you tune in. Like, that's why I watched the Iron Bowl when Auburn was relevant, and they do it. That's why I watched Alabama, Texas in 2023. I want to see if Texas could do it.
Yeah.
That's why I would always watch the SEC championship. Could Georgia do it? You know what I mean? It's stuff like that, and so I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, the final piece of this conversation, Shaun, is just what will that combination of the top 4 be? And we've talked about it a little bit already, but I think until shown otherwise, I think it'll be, either, 2 teams from the SEC or 2 teams from the Big Ten, and then 1 team from either the SEC and 1 team from the Big Ten and Notre Dame, with the trajectory that this program is on. I fully believe that, and people can call it a homer take if you like, but Notre Dame went into the playoffs last year and they beat the SEC champs. I have all the reason to believe that as of today. Now, who knows what happens as the season goes on, or injuries or transfer portal issues, or who gets hot at the right time, because again, with an expanded playoffs, that is some of it. Ohio State got hot at the right time. Nobody was thinking about, not talent of the roster aside, after they lost to Michigan at home for the 4th straight year, nobody's like, man, I can't wait to watch the Buckeyes hoist the trophy. Nobody was thinking that.
Yeah.
People were thinking that after Georgia with a backup quarterback beat Texas in the SEC championship. People were thinking that after watching Oregon go 13-0.
Yeah.
And so that to me is, I mean, some people were even thinking that about Notre Dame. They just rattled off 10 straight wins and beat IU at home in the first ever college football playoff game. Who knows how that's going to roll out? That's why the Georgia Notre Dame game was so big. Yeah. But I think from here on out, it's just going to be some sort of combination of that. I think the worst possible case scenario is you get like 3 teams from the same conference in the finals, depending on how the rankings and seeding shape out. Like, I think that could be what would because then you run the risk of a rematch from the regular season in the semifinals. Like, I don't know if anybody would want to watch an Ohio State, Penn State semifinal game outside of people in Columbus and people in, you know what I mean?
Almost ended up being the national championship.
I know. I know.
Very close. I think if you get something like that this year, though, like you said, I think you mentioned it. You're talking about Texas, Ohio State, Clemson. Yeah, I mean, if you get an undefeated team from the Big 12, maybe that's the fourth team. Maybe that's the route to getting it this year. I don't see a team in the Big 12 running the table, though, but
This year is my prediction to where you could see the closest thing to it and having a 1, 2, and 3 in the semifinals.
yep.
If Clemson shapes out the way that a lot of people believe them to be, myself included.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds this year. So
I'm right there with you.
Well, folks, that is going to do it today for the RTCF show on Monday. We're all hoping and praying for Brian and hoping that his power comes back on. Luckily, him and Ange and the dogs, they're all good. I know the storm and the bad weather hit up north pretty rough. We had some thunderstorms down here in Indianapolis, but it wasn't like anything that northern Indiana and southern Michigan face. So if you guys do live up around that area, hope everything's continuing going well for you guys. Hopefully the power for Brian kicks back on here pretty soon, because I know he's chomping at the bit to get back in and talk some Notre Dame football and some college football. But Shaun, today, always a pleasure doing a show with you, my friend.
Hey, my man. Thank you guys so much. Notre Dame fans, IB Nation, as always, lock in. Big week in recruiting. Make sure you go to the boards. We'll have updates on how things are going with kids and dropping articles all week long leading up to the day we've all been waiting for, to finally see these quarterbacks on Saturday afternoon. So lock in over at boardsirishbreakdown.com for all your recruiting updates.
You heard it here first. Go check out the Champions Lounge on the premium message boards. But ladies and gentlemen, before you get out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you watch this on, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review, whether that's on Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts. Enjoy the rest of your night. I think IB Nation Sports Talk will be live today at 5. I'll have to double check that, but it's a great reason to have your notification bell hit so you know whenever Irish Breakdown goes live. So until the next time, that's Shaun Davis. I'm Trevor Trowbridge. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.